I made this video because Tian Wen is one of the most quietly devastating characters in Arc Raiders, and almost nobody was talking about her. Most lore content focuses on the Arc itself, on the machines, on the apocalypse overhead, and that's valid. But I kept coming back to this woman standing in the corner of Speranza, repairing guns she probably hates, for people she definitely resents. There's a whole tragedy running beneath every line of dialogue she delivers, and I wanted to pull that thread all the way to the end. One specific choice I made when assembling this video, I put her father's story before her own, because I think that's the only way her coldness makes any real sense. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. Intro hook. In a world where machines fall from the sky and humanity clings to survival in broken cities, one woman alone in the dark holds the secret to why the last generation of raiders fights, dies, and keeps coming back for more. And her name is Tian Wen. Chapter 1. Welcome to the end of the world. There are stories that begin with explosions. There are stories that begin with heroes standing on hilltops, cloaks billowing, speeches ready, eyes burning with purpose. This is not one of those stories. This story begins in silence. It begins with dust on a workbench and the sound of metal being filed down by hands that have long since stopped trembling. It begins in a place called Speranza, and it begins with a woman who would rather you didn't ask her name. But we are going to ask anyway. We are going to dig into every layer of this world, every scrap of lore, every quest marker and crumbled wall and forgotten photograph. Because the story of Tian Wen is not just a side character's biography, it is, in many ways, the emotional backbone of Arc Raiders. The quiet human cost that sits beneath every firefight and every mission briefing that sends raiders out into a dead world to retrieve things that shouldn't matter, but somehow still do. Arc Raiders is a game about survival. That much is obvious the moment you look at it. The sky is wrong, the machines are relentless. The cities are ruins wrapped in the memory of what they once were. Humanity didn't lose the war against the Ark in a single dramatic moment. It lost slowly, the way you lose a fire in the rain, not all at once, but piece by piece, until only the last ember remains and you have to cup your hands around it just to keep it alive. That last ember is Speranza. That is where our story lives, and that is where Tian Wen has made her home. But before we get there, we need to understand the world that made her. We need to understand what the Ark actually is, what it did, and why the people who survived it are the particular kind of broken that they are. Because none of Tian Wen's choices make sense outside of the context of the world that shaped her, and the world that shaped her is one of the most fascinating, horrifying, and strangely beautiful settings in modern gaming. The Ark. Even the name sounds wrong. Not threatening exactly, more like the name of something enormous that doesn't care whether it threatens you or not. The Arc Raiders lore positions the Ark as an extraterrestrial automated system, a structure that descends from somewhere beyond our understanding and unleashes machines designed to harvest, strip, and process the Earth's surface. Not out of malice, not out of conquest, simply because that is what it does. It is a program running to completion, and humanity is an obstacle in its path. Nothing more and nothing less. There is something almost philosophically terrifying about an enemy that doesn't hate you. An enemy that hates you can be reasoned with, or at least engaged on some emotional level. An enemy that doesn't know you exist and wouldn't care if it did, that is a different kind of horror entirely. The machines of the Ark don't chase you because they want to kill you. They chase you because your presence registers as interference, and interference is something their programming is designed to eliminate. You are not prey, you are noise, and they are the silence that consumes it. This context is everything. This is the world that parents in Speranza try to explain to their children when the children ask why the sky sometimes lights up at night with shapes that don't look like stars. This is the world that raiders train for, gear up for, and run headlong into every time they drop into an extraction zone. And this is the world that Tian Wen grew up in, though she would tell you she didn't grow up so much as she endured. There is a difference, and she knows it better than most. The Earth depicted in Arc Raiders is not a post-apocalyptic wasteland in the traditional sense. It's not barren, it's not dead. In fact, In many ways, it is achingly, painfully alive, overgrown in some areas, frozen in time in others, cities suspended in the moment of their last breath, like insects preserved in amber. The buried city is the most striking example of this. It is a place where civilization went underground, not as a triumph, but as a retreat, layer upon layer of human industry compressed into a stratigraphy of desperation. People built down because up had become impossible. Raiders who work the buried city routes talk about it in hushed tones when they get back to Speranza. They talk about the smells first, diesel and rust, and something floral that shouldn't be there, flowers growing through cracked concrete in the dark. They talk about the silence, how complete it is in certain sections, the kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound like a drum roll. And then they talk about the things they find down there, the objects that tell stories about people who didn't make it, and the way those objects sit in the rubble as if waiting for someone to come and finish the sentence that death interrupted. It is into this world that our story goes. But first, we have to go back further. We have to go back to a battle that most living raiders only know as a name on a memorial, a battle that defined the generation before theirs, and cast a shadow long enough to reach all the way into the present, through the years and the rubble and the grief, to land squarely on the shoulders of one young woman working in a corner of Speranza, with her tools and her silence and her complicated inheritance. That battle is called Victory Ridge. And victory, as the name suggests, was not what happened there. The stories about Victory Ridge exist in fragments, the way all the most important stories in Ark Raiders exist. Pieces of testimony preserved in objects, in quest dialogues, in the things people almost say and then don't, in the careful architecture of a silence around a subject that nobody in Speranza is entirely comfortable discussing. Victory Ridge was a military engagement. That much is certain. It was a coordinated effort by human forces to push back against an Ark incursion, to hold a strategic position, to prove that organized resistance was possible and not just a beautiful way to die. Major Ivar led part of that effort. The name Major Ivar doesn't appear on many walls in Speranza. It doesn't need to. It lives in the muscle memory of people who were there, and in the carefully controlled expression of one person who wasn't. Her daughter, who was still too young when it happened, who got the news in the way that children always get news about the deaths of parents, which is to say badly, incompletely, and in a way she would spend the rest of her life trying to process. We will spend considerable time with Major Ivar in this video. We will walk through everything we know about her, everything the game tells us through objects and dialogues, and the careful construction of Tian Wen's character, because Tian Wen is, in many ways, a monument to her mother. A monument that doesn't know it's a monument and might be furious if you told it so. For now, though, let's stay in the wide shot. Let's look at this world from above, from the kind of altitude where you can see the shape of things, where you can see that this is a story about what happens when the systems humanity built to protect itself become insufficient, and what happens to the people who have to live in the aftermath of that insufficiency. It is a story about adaptation and about the cost of that adaptation. It is a story about what you have to become in order to survive, and whether the person you become is someone you would have recognized when you were young and the world was still whole. Ark Raiders as a game asks these questions constantly, in every environment it builds, in every character it populates Speranza with. But it asks them most pointedly through Tian Wen, because Tian Wen represents a particular kind of survivor. Not the heroic kind, not the traumatized but hopeful kind that games often gravitate toward, but the functional kind. The kind who gets up every morning and does the work because the work needs doing, and sentiment is a luxury she stopped being able to afford a long time ago. Understanding her requires patience. It requires the willingness to sit with complexity, to not rush to judgment about her coldness or her abrasiveness. Because when you understand where she comes from, when you trace the line from Victory Ridge to the workbench in Speranza, her personality stops being a character flaw and starts being something closer to a coping mechanism, built so thoroughly into the structure of her identity that she may no longer be able to tell the difference. The world of Ark Raiders is full of characters who cope. That's one of its most distinctive features as a narrative setting. Nobody is entirely okay. Nobody has escaped unscathed. But there is an enormous variety in the ways that people choose to not be okay, the strategies they deploy to keep functioning under conditions that would have broken most of the humans who came before them. Some people find community. Some people find purpose. Some people find bottle. Tian Wen found her craft, and she holds on to it the way you hold on to the last rope over a canyon. Her workbench is her world. Her tools are her language. And the guns she builds, those beautiful, functional, lethal instruments, are her way of being present in a place she has never quite felt she belonged. Every weapon she crafts is an argument that she is useful, that her being here serves a purpose beyond sentiment, that she doesn't need anyone to like her as long as she can be necessary. It is the logic of a person who decided early on that love was not something she could count on remaining, so she built her self-worth on something more durable: skill. But skill, as any craftsman knows, is not enough to keep you warm, and there are moments, brief, guarded, almost invisible, if you're not looking carefully, where Tian Wen's walls develop something close to a crack, where the work she gives raiders isn't just transactional, where the things she asks them to find carry a weight that goes beyond practical value. We will identify those moments, we will examine them closely, and we will let them speak to us about the person inside the persona, the daughter inside the expert, the grief inside the competence. That is the journey this video is going to take. It is going to be long, it is going to be detailed. We are going to cover the world, the history, the battles, the quests, the objects, the dialogues, and the silences. We are going to build a complete picture of Tian Wen, not just as an NPC who gives you assignments and repairs your guns, but as a fully realized human being whose life tells one of the most quietly devastating stories in Arc Raiders. This is not an easy story, but the best ones rarely are. Let's begin. We need to start at the broadest level before we can narrow down to the specific, because the specific, Tian Wen, her workbench, her voice with its controlled edge, only becomes meaningful in the context of the enormous. So we start with the arc itself, not in scientific terms, not in the language of law codices and system specifications, but in experiential terms. What does the arc feel like to live under? What does it mean, day to day, year to year, to exist in a world where something that large and that indifferent is constantly present? The answer, based on everything the game gives us, is that it feels like weather, not the specific storms, but the constant awareness that at any moment a storm could come. People who grew up after the initial incursions, the generation that includes Tian Wen, don't remember a world without the arc. They don't have a before to compare the after to. They just have this world, these rules, this particular texture of everyday life that includes fortified walls and air patrols, and the distant sound of machine activity that might mean nothing, or might mean everything. This normalization of danger is one of the most interesting psychological undercurrents in Arc Raiders lore. The older characters, the ones who carry the weight of memory, are often the ones most visibly affected by grief, because they can measure the distance between then and now. The younger ones have a different relationship with it. Not less damaged, necessarily, but differently damaged. The damage for them is architectural. It's built into the structure of how they see the world, not experienced as a wound, but worn as a lens. Tian Wen wears it as a lens. She doesn't mourn the world that existed before the arc, because she never had access to that world. Her grief is not for a lost civilization. It is for something far more intimate and far more specific. A person who left and didn't come back, and a life that had to be reconstructed around the absence that person left behind. That reconstruction is what we're going to be studying today, and it starts at the foundation. What was Speranza like when Tian Wen was young? The game doesn't give us direct flashbacks, but it gives us enough of the current Speranza and enough of the surrounding lore to make some educated inferences. Speranza is not a large settlement. It is not a city-state or a bunker complex. It is a community, a tight, specific, somewhat claustrophobic community of people who have thrown their lot in together because the alternative is worse. Its resources are limited, its space is cramped, its social dynamics, like all small community social dynamics, are dense with history and the particular tensions that develop when people can't afford to leave. In that context, being the daughter of Major Ivar was not a simple thing. On one hand, it likely conferred a certain status. Commanders who die heroically tend to leave their families with a kind of social capital, a residual respect that gets transferred by proximity. On the other hand, being a symbol is not the same as being seen. Being revered for who your mother was is not the same as being known for who you are. And for a child already processing grief, the constant reminder of her mother's legend may have felt less like honoring and more like the community's inability to let her just be sad about losing her mum. This is speculation. The game doesn't spell it out in these terms, but the person Tian Wen becomes guarded, self-reliant, more comfortable with tools than with people, dismissive of the social rituals that most of Speranza navigates. That person didn't arrive from nowhere. That person is the product of a very specific set of pressures applied over a long time to a very specific kind of character. And so we begin with the world, with the machines, with the sky that is always wrong and the city that refused to go quietly into the dark. We begin with the understanding that everything in Arc Raiders exists at the intersection of the enormous and the intimate, that the machines matter because of what they do to people, and that the people matter because they are what makes the machine's presence a tragedy rather than just a process. Without the humans, the Ark is just a force of nature. With them, it is a horror. And the horror is always most legible in the specific, in the personal, in the single face looking up at the sky with an expression that contains everything they have decided not to say aloud. That face, for our purposes today, belongs to Tian Wen, and everything about her story, every quest she offers, every piece of dialogue she delivers, every repair she makes in silence while a raider waits, is a chapter in the larger story of what the Ark did to humanity, told not in the scale of battles and strategies, but in the intimate and irreversible language of a life. We are going to read every word of it. The setting matters enormously here, so let's spend a moment really dwelling in it. The buried city, which features prominently in Tian Wen's quests, is not just a location. It is a narrative environment. It tells a story through its architecture, through the way human construction layers upon itself like geological strata, each layer representing a different phase of desperate adaptation. The earliest layers are familiar. Streets, buildings, the infrastructure of a civilization that didn't yet know what was coming. Then the adaptations begin to show. Reinforced overhangs, sealed windows, improvised barriers, the architecture of fear building itself incrementally until the final layers are barely recognizable as something human beings chose as opposed to something they were forced into. Running missions in the buried city is a different experience from running missions in the open zones. It's tighter, sounds carry differently. The light comes from wrong angles or doesn't come at all. Raiders who work those routes develop a specific skill set, the ability to navigate enclosed spaces quickly, the ability to track sound around corners, the ability to assess threat in conditions where normal spatial reasoning doesn't quite apply. It's not a place for people who need to see the horizon. Tian Wen sends raiders there repeatedly. That's worth noting. Not every quest giver in Speranza routes players through the buried city. It's a specific choice, and it's the kind of choice that tells us something about how Tian Wen thinks. She thinks in terms of difficulty. She thinks in terms of what she considers worthy of her time and attention, and she applies that standard to the tasks she assigns. If you want what she's offering, you have to go where it's hard. That's her philosophy in a nutshell, applied to mission design. In the next section, we'll leave the wide establishing shot behind and start moving toward the specific. We'll start to talk about Speranza, not as a concept, but as a place. Its layout, its culture, its hierarchy, and where Tian Wen exists within all of that. We'll start to feel the texture of her daily life, the particular weight of being in that space, being that person, having that history, and we'll begin to build the portrait of someone who is, depending on how you look at her, either one of the most admirable survivors in Speranza, or one of the most tragic, or, most likely, both at once. Because in stories worth telling, those things are rarely mutually exclusive. In stories worth telling, the most admirable qualities and the most heartbreaking ones are usually made from the same material. That's true of Tian Wen, that's true of this world, and that's why we're here. Stay with me. This is going to be worth it. The complete picture is going to take time to build, but by the time we're finished, you will understand Tian Wen in a way that the game's moment-to-moment experience doesn't quite allow for. You will understand why she says what she says, and asks for what she asks for, and gives what she gives with a particular grudging precision that characterizes everything she does. You will understand the woman behind the workbench, and if this video does its job, you might find her significantly harder to dismiss. One more thing before we move on. I want to acknowledge something about the nature of this kind of law research. Ark Raiders is a game that tells much of its story indirectly. The details are distributed across environments, item descriptions, quest texts, fragments of dialogue, and the careful design of spaces. There is no single cutscene where a narrator explains everything. You have to assemble it yourself, and in that assembly process, interpretation is inevitable. Where the game gives us facts, I will give you facts. Where it gives us implications, I will explore them as implications. And where it gives us silence, I will try to read that silence as carefully as possible, without projecting more certainty than the evidence supports. This video is the result of extensive time spent with the game's lore. Every item I could examine, every dialogue I could trigger, every environmental detail I could document. But it is also an act of interpretation, and I want to be transparent about that. What I'm offering you is my best, most thorough reading of Tian Wen's story as the game presents it. Other readings are possible. This is the one I find most compelling, most emotionally coherent, and most consistent with the evidence. I hope you find it as fascinating as I do. Now, let's go to Speranza. Chapter 2. Speranza, the city that refuses to die. To understand Tian Wen, you have to understand the place that shaped her. And the place that shaped her is one of the most interesting small-scale community designs in recent gaming. A settlement built not on optimism, but on the stubborn refusal to be extinguished. Speranza. The name itself is a deliberate provocation. It means hope in Italian, and in this context it functions less like a description and more like a dare. You want to call this place hopeless? Fine. We named it Hope anyway. Come at us. This kind of defiant naming is characteristic of how human communities in Ark Raiders present themselves. They don't pretend things are fine. They are far too beaten up for that kind of performance. But they also refuse the alternative, the complete surrender of meaning, the acceptance that all of this is ultimately pointless. Speranza stakes its claim to meaning through persistence, and that persistence is written into everything about it. The patched walls, the repurposed machinery, the market stalls that somehow still operate in the shadow of machine incursion. The people who get up every morning and make coffee and argue about resources and plan for a future they're not entirely sure is coming. The physical layout of Speranza tells its own story. It is a settlement that has been added to, modified, reinforced, and rebuilt over time. And you can read that history in the architecture if you know how to look. The original structure, whatever it was before it became a refuge, has been layered over with the evidence of each successive need, each crisis overcome, each expansion made possible by the arrival of new people, or the discovery of new resources. It is a palimpsest of desperation becoming community, and it is beautiful in the particular way that improvised things are beautiful. Not because they're pretty, but because they're alive. Within that community, different people occupy different niches. There are the traders, the fighters, the medics, the administrators, the priests of various half-remembered faiths, the children who have grown up here and know no other world. And then there are the specialists, the people whose specific skills are valuable enough to earn them a particular kind of status, even when their personalities don't exactly invite social warmth. Tian Wen is the premier example of this category. Her role in Speranza is officially that of resident weapon crafter. Practically, that means she is the person you go to when your gun is broken and you can't afford to lose it. When you need a weapon built to specifications that the standard market can't provide. When you have a complex parts list and need someone capable of executing on it, without asking too many questions about why you want what you want. She is the craftsperson that every settlement needs, and few settlements can afford to have, because the skill level required to do what she does is genuinely rare. But understanding her role in Speranza requires understanding what weapons mean in this world. In most contexts, a weapon is a tool, a means to an end, important, but not sacred. In Speranza, in the wider world of Ark Raiders, weapons carry an additional weight. They are the thing that stands between life and machine. Every raider who goes out into an extraction zone is carrying their survival in their hands. And what their hands are carrying is almost certainly something that Tian Wen has touched in some capacity. Either she built it, or she repaired it, or she upgraded a component that makes the difference between a shot that matters and one that doesn't. Her craft is not separate from survival. It is survival, made metal, and given purpose. This gives her a kind of authority that goes beyond her official role. She doesn't command troops, she doesn't make policy decisions, but when she says something won't work, raiders listen. When she assesses a weapon's condition and tells you it's compromised, you believe her because the alternative is going into the field with compromised gear and finding out the hard way that she was right. Her expertise is backed by consequence, and consequence is the only currency that truly matters in Speranza. The dynamic this creates between Tian Wen and the raiders she services is fascinating. They need her. She is aware that they need her. She does not abuse this awareness in any obvious way. She doesn't extort. She doesn't play favorites based on personal affection. She doesn't leverage her position for social power. But she does carry herself with the particular self-possession of someone who has never had to chase approval, because the work itself guarantees her a place in the world, regardless of whether anyone particularly enjoys her company. And not everyone does enjoy her company. Tian Wen is by most accounts not easy. She is direct to the point of bluntness, occasionally to the point of offense. She doesn't soften things. She doesn't perform warmth she isn't feeling. When a raider comes in with a gun that's been handled carelessly, she says so. When someone tries to explain away poor maintenance habits, she cuts them off. She has a hierarchy of values, and at the top of that hierarchy is the work. Doing it correctly, doing it honestly, not wasting time on social lubrication when the actual problem needs addressing. This makes some people in Speranza uncomfortable. There is a certain social expectation, in tight communities especially, that everyone will participate in the maintenance of communal goodwill, that you'll exchange pleasantries, that you'll soften hard truths, that you'll prioritize the feeling of being valued over the blunt reality of being assessed. Tian Wen opts out of this expectation almost completely. She is not cruel, but she is not gentle. And in the social ecosystem of Speranza, where so much is held together by the fragile mortar of mutual regard, her refusal to participate in the ritual of collective niceness can read as contempt, even when it isn't quite that. The people who understand her tend to be the ones who've worked with her long enough to learn the difference. Her bluntness, they'll tell you, is not superiority, it is efficiency. She is not looking down at you when she says your grip tape is installed incorrectly. She is just telling you the truth so that you can fix it and not die. The warmth is there, buried underneath the efficiency. It is expressed not in words, but in the extra hour she spent on the receiver housing you can't see, the tolerance margins she holds to with a precision that goes beyond what was technically required. The care is in the craft. You just have to know how to read it. Speranza's reaction to Tian Wen is, in aggregate, a kind of grateful wariness. They need what she does, they respect what she does, and they give her the space she prefers, partly out of respect, and partly because she has made it quite clear, in various non-verbal and occasionally very verbal ways, that intruding on that space without a specific and pressing reason is not something she will receive graciously. Her workshop is the center of her world. We should spend some time with it. In many ways, it is as much a character in this story as she is, because the environment a person creates around themselves tells you things about them that their words sometimes don't. The workshop is organized, intensely, almost obsessively organized. Every tool has its place, and the place is not arbitrary. It is the result of long experience of what placement produces the most efficient workflow, what arrangement allows for movement without hesitation, what configuration allows her to reach what she needs without breaking focus on the task she's currently engaged with. There are no decorations in the workshop that are purely decorative. Every object present earns its place through function. There is no clutter. There is, however, a certain density, the density of a space that is used hard and regularly, where every surface bears the pattern of work, where the walls carry the marks of accumulated purpose. It is the workshop of someone who lives in their work, and that living in is visible in every detail. Except for one thing. We'll get to that thing. but not yet. First, we need to understand the community around Tian Wen, the ecosystem of Speranza that she exists within and in relation to, before we can appreciate the significance of the details that don't fit the pattern. The details that don't fit the pattern are always the most important ones. Other craftspeople in Speranza have different relationships with their work and their community. There are builders who talk constantly while they work, people for whom the labor is the container for the social experience, not separate from it. There are traders for whom every interaction is a relationship, every exchange an investment in a network. And there are people like Tian Wen, for whom the work and the relationship are not just separate things but occupants of different rooms that she carefully keeps from meeting. Why? Partly temperament, partly skill level. When you're operating at the level Tian Wen operates at, distraction is expensive. The tolerances she works to, the complexity of the systems she maintains and creates, require a focus that is genuinely difficult to maintain in the presence of social stimulation. Her preference for solitude is not just personality, it is a professional necessity that has become, over time, a lifestyle and then a personality. But there is more to it than that, and the more to it is what makes her interesting. The raiders she works with occupy a particular place in her emotional geography, a place that is defined by a specific, deeply personal conflict. On one hand, they are her clients, the people who bring her work and keep her craft alive. On the other hand, they are the category of person that her mother was, and her mother came back in a box, and every raider who walks through her door is a walking reminder of that fact. She is not sentimental about this. She would say, if you could get her to say anything, that the risks raiders take are their own business, and she has nothing to do with it. But the particular flavor of contempt she sometimes shows toward careless raiders, toward ones who treat their gear irresponsibly, carries an undertone that goes deeper than professional disapproval. Take care of your tools. Don't be reckless. Come back alive. These are not just the words of a craftsperson protecting her work. These are the words of a person who understands, in her bones, that recklessness has consequences that extend far beyond the person being reckless. We hear those consequences in the silence she keeps about her mother. We will examine them in detail in later sections of this video. For now, let's just note that Speranza is a complex social world, and Tian Wen's place within it is complex in ways that her exterior does not advertise. She is more enmeshed with this community than she appears. She is more affected by it than she would admit. And the distance she keeps is not the distance of indifference, but the distance of someone who's decided, for reasons that make perfect sense when you know them, that getting too close is a risk she cannot afford. The layout of Speranza reflects these social dynamics in interesting ways. The communal areas are warm and well used. There are gathering spaces, shared resources, places where the community explicitly performs its own cohesion. And then there are the workshop areas, the specialist zones, where the work happens and the social traffic is managed. Tian Wen's corner of Speranza sits at the boundary of these two worlds, close enough to the community to be part of it, separate enough from the social center to maintain the distance she requires. This is not accidental. The placement of her workspace is a negotiated geography, a spatial expression of her relationship with Speranza. Present but apart, necessary but not integrated. She is the ingredient that makes the whole thing work without being entirely of it. Over the years, raiders have developed a kind of informal etiquette for dealing with Tian Wen. You don't make small talk. You state your business clearly and completely. You don't speculate about what she needs, the things she asks for. You bring what she asks for, you report back accurately, and you receive what she gives you with whatever gratitude you feel. Privately, because expressing it out loud tends to produce the particular expression of discomfort that Tian Wen wears when someone forces her to receive warmth she wasn't prepared for. These unwritten rules exist because they work. They allow the transaction between her and the raiders to proceed efficiently. They protect both parties from a social awkwardness that neither of them particularly wants. And they have, over time, created a strange kind of respect, a relationship built on clarity and precision rather than warmth, but no less real for that. Some raiders take pride in being one of Tian Wen's regulars, not in a sentimental way, more in the way you take pride in being trusted by someone difficult. Her threshold for bringing work to certain raiders is based entirely on demonstrated competence and reliability, and being on the right side of that threshold means something concrete. It means better jobs, more complex assignments, access to her more sophisticated work. It is a meritocracy as stripped of social noise as she can make it, and in the brutal pragmatism of Speranza, many people find that refreshing, even if they also find her exhausting. Let's talk about what Speranza means in the broader lore before we go further into Tian Wen's specific story. Because Speranza is not just a location, it is a thesis about humanity's capacity to persist. Everything about it, every repaired wall and salvaged lamp and maintained garden, is an argument against the conclusion that the Ark has essentially already won. The Ark operates on machine time. It is patient in the way that only systems without consciousness can be patient, willing to process indefinitely until the task is complete. Humanity operates on human time, urgent, fragmented, sentimental, inefficient, and in those inefficiencies containing the very qualities that make it worth saving. The tension between these two temporalities runs through everything in Ark Raiders. The machine patrols on schedules, the humans scramble, the machine executes with precision, the humans improvise. And somehow, in the space created by those improvisations, people build things like Speranza. Small, fragile, improbable, stubbornly alive. Tian Wen is a product of that stubbornness. She is not stubborn because she is optimistic. She is stubborn because she is constitutionally incapable of giving up, and she channels that stubbornness into the one domain where it produces immediate, tangible, measurable results: her craft. Every weapon she builds is a small act of defiance against a machine world that runs on determinism. She is making things that change outcomes, and outcomes in this world, as she knows better than most, are the only thing that actually matters. Speranza will continue to be our home base for this entire narrative. We will keep returning to it between explorations of the quests and the history and the wider lore, because the story of Tian Wen is ultimately a story about belonging, about a person who doesn't entirely believe she belongs anywhere, doing the work that makes her essential to the place she can't quite bring herself to call home. That tension, more than anything else, is what I want to convey in this video. It's what makes her such a compelling subject. It's what makes her quests feel like more than missions. And it's what makes the small details, the compass she needs found, the videotape she asks about with a carefully controlled face, feel like windows into something much larger and much more personal than the objective text on the screen suggests. We will open those windows, every one of them. Chapter 3. Who is Tian Wen? Now we get specific. Now we move from the world and the community to the individual, to the particular construction of a person named Tian Wen, weapon crafter, resident of Speranza, daughter of legend, maker of things that kill with precision. This chapter is about the question behind all the others. Who, actually, is she? The first thing to understand about Tian Wen as a character is that she is deliberately resistant to easy characterization. The game does not hand her to you whole. You receive her in pieces, assembled across multiple interactions, multiple quests, multiple observations of the way she moves through her space and the way she talks about the things she asks for. She is a puzzle that the game expects you to work at, and the working at is the point. Tian Wen would probably respect that design philosophy more than any other approach, because it mirrors her own. She doesn't offer herself easily. You have to earn the pieces. Start with the external, the presentation. Her physical presence in Speranza is deliberate in a way that communicates something specific. She occupies her space efficiently, nothing wasted, nothing performed. When she moves with the confidence of someone who knows exactly where everything is and exactly what she's going to do with it. This is the body language of skill, of a person whose physical relationship with their environment has been refined by thousands of repetitions into something close to automatic. Her hands are always in motion, or on the verge of motion, waiting for the next thing they're needed for. Her voice has the same quality, precise, never excessive. She uses words the way she uses materials, only what's required, no more. This can make her seem cold, and it does make some raiders uncomfortable, because most human communication contains significant quantities of padding, filler words, and social softeners and redundancies that exist not to convey information, but to create a feeling of goodwill. Tian Wen strips those out. What remains is compressed and exact, and if you're not used to it, it can feel like being handed a stripped-down weapon with all the ergonomic accessories removed, functionally superior, but initially jarring. What she talks about, when she talks, is almost entirely practical. The condition of a component, the specifications of what she needs, the deficiencies of a particular approach to a problem. She rarely volunteers personal information, rarely responds to attempts to make conversation about anything not directly related to the work at hand. This is not a studied performance of detachment, it is a genuine preference. She simply finds most social interaction inefficient relative to the signal it produces, and she has never been persuaded to value it for its own sake. But here is the thing about Tian Wen that makes her interesting rather than merely abrasive. Underneath the precision, underneath the efficiency, there is evidence of care. The care is expressed exclusively through the craft, but it is real. Raiders who are sharp enough to recognize quality can see it in her work, see that she went beyond what was required, that the finish is better than you asked for, that she anticipated a problem you hadn't noticed yet and corrected for it without comment. This is not the work of someone who doesn't care. This is the work of someone who cares enormously and has found the one channel through which she can safely express it. Her craft is her emotional language. When she puts extra time into a weapon, she is saying something that she would never say in words. When she ensures that the tolerances are tighter than spec, she is making an argument for the value of the person who will carry that weapon into a situation that may kill them. She doesn't frame it that way. She would not frame it that way. But the evidence is in the metal. This makes her quests particularly interesting to examine. The things she asks raiders to find and the places she sends them to are not random. They are connected to her life in ways that she doesn't explicitly communicate. And uncovering those connections is one of the rewarding aspects of working through her questline carefully. Each mission is a piece of autobiography presented as a mission briefing. Once you know enough of her background to read the subtext, the practical assignments take on an additional dimension. They become a way of understanding what she thinks about, what she hasn't let go of, and what she is still, even now, trying to resolve. Let's talk about her relationship with raiders as a class of person. Because this relationship is complicated in a way that shapes every interaction she has with the players who come to her for work and for services. Tian Wen does not like raiders, or more precisely, she has a complex, conflicted, deeply layered relationship with the category that she expresses through a general attitude of disdain, while continuing to do the work that keeps them operational. This contradiction is the engine of much of her character. The disdain is real. It is not a performance. She thinks raiders are often reckless, often foolish, often sentimental in ways that get them killed, and often arrogant in ways that lead them to dismiss the kinds of careful preparation that would make them less likely to get killed. She has seen the results of that recklessness come back through Speranza, the bodies, the broken gear, the rippling grief in the community when someone who went out didn't come back. She has opinions about why that happens, and they are sharp and not kind. But the disdain is layered over something else. It is layered over a history that makes her relationship with raiders personal in a way she has never fully processed. And that personal dimension is what gives her disdain its particular edge. It's not the edge of contempt, it is the edge of pain performing as contempt. Because pain is soft and contempt is hard, and she has spent a long time deciding that hard is safer. We will spend an entire chapter on her father, on Major Ivor, and what that relationship means to Tian Wen's psychology. For now, just note that the way she talks to raiders, the careful distance she maintains, the occasional flashes of something that looks almost like protectiveness when a raider comes back from a mission she sent them on, all of this makes more sense when you know what raiders mean to her in the deepest, most unguarded part of her identity. Her relationship with her tools is uncomplicated in a way that her relationship with people never is. Tools don't die. Tools don't leave. Tools perform exactly as their design dictates, and when they fail for reasons that are discoverable and correctable. There is no mystery to tool failure that patience and skill cannot resolve. This is profoundly comforting to a person who has experienced the irreversible mystery of human loss. She cannot diagnose what went wrong at Victory Ridge. She cannot inspect the failure point and determine the exact cause and prevent it from happening again. But she can do those things for a rifle. And so she does, with a thoroughness that goes beyond professional necessity. Tian Wen is also, it should be said, brilliant. Not just skilled, genuinely brilliant in the specific domain of weaponcraft, but brilliant in the broader sense too. The sense of a mind that operates quickly and precisely, and is always slightly ahead of the conversation it's in. She catches things that others miss. She thinks several steps forward in a problem space that most people are still navigating the entry of. This intelligence contributes to her impatience, because intelligent people in fields they have mastered often find the pace of others' understanding exhausting. And exhaustion is not a quality that improves social charm. She is also perceptive. Sharp in the way that people who pay attention become sharp. She reads environments and people with the same careful observation she applies to mechanism and component. She knows more about what's happening in Speranza than most people suspect, because she watches and she remembers and she connects things that other people experience as separate. This perceptiveness is another thing she rarely deploys socially. She stores what she learns, uses it when it matters, and doesn't perform it as social capital. What does she want? That's the question that gets at the core of any character. Not what she needs, not what she does, but what she actually wants. The thing underneath the work, and the competence, and the carefully maintained distance. The game gestures at this through her quests, through the specific nature of what she asks raiders to retrieve, through the moments where her carefully controlled expression slips slightly and something more complicated passes across it. What she wants is not complicated once you identify it. She wants the work to be enough. She wants to be able to look at what she builds and have that be sufficient justification for her presence, sufficient emotional outlet, sufficient proof that she matters in this world in a way that doesn't require her to be vulnerable to the kinds of loss she has already experienced and has no intention of experiencing again. She wants her craft to be a complete world in itself, one that doesn't need any external validation or supplementary warmth. The tragedy is that it almost is enough. Almost, but not quite. And the not quite is what the quests reveal, what the specific things she asks for tell us, what the silences in her dialogue suggest. The not quite is what makes her a character worth this much attention. She is, for all her self-sufficiency and her carefully maintained barriers, a person in the grip of something she never fully addressed. Not grief exactly, she would reject the word, but something adjacent to grief, something that lives in the same neighborhood and uses the same coping mechanisms. She is carrying something that her craft can hold, but not resolve, and that irresolution shows up in the work she gives raiders, in the specificity of what she needs and why she needs it, in the careful way she avoids explaining the why, even when the specific of the what is somewhat inexplicable on purely practical grounds. Her name carries meaning too, Tian Wen. In Chinese, the characters can be interpreted variously, but among the meanings most resonant with her character, questions about the sky or questions about heaven, there is a classical Chinese text called Tian Wen, a long poem of unanswered questions. Questions directed at the cosmos, at the natural order, at the reason things are as they are. The narrator of that poem stands before the universe and says, "Explain yourself. Answer me. Tell me why things are the way they are." The universe does not answer. Whether the game intends this as a direct reference is ambiguous, but the resonance is there for those who look for it. A woman named questions about the sky, living under a sky occupied by machines, carrying questions about why things are the way they are, that she will never ask aloud, and that the universe will not answer regardless. The elegance of that, if it is intentional, is breathtaking. And even if it isn't intentional, the resonance itself is real, and it enriches the character. Her personality in the context of Speranza's social world creates a specific kind of isolation that is different from loneliness. Loneliness is a want for company that is unfulfilled. Tian Wen's isolation is more like a chosen position at the edge of the community, a position that maintains the connection while controlling the distance. She can see the community from where she stands. She participates in it functionally. She keeps it operational in her specific way, but she does not immerse herself in it, does not allow it to immerse itself in her. This position at the edge is where she is most herself. The workshop, the tools, the work, that is her natural environment, and in it she is not isolated. She is simply alone, and there is a difference. Alone is a condition. Isolated is a feeling. Tian Wen has long since made her peace with the condition. The feeling is another matter. Her relationship with younger raiders is particularly telling. She treats them with the same precise professionalism she extends to everyone. But there are moments, caught, if you're paying attention, in the slight variations of her delivery, where something that might be concern appears. Not maternal concern, nothing that soft. More like the concern of an experienced professional watching someone embark on something genuinely dangerous with insufficient respect for what that danger actually entails. She sends them to hard places. She always has. But the briefings for those hard places, if you listen carefully, contain embedded warnings, things stated as practical information that are also, if you decode them, expressions of her understanding of what those places are capable of. Take the right approach. Don't linger. Note the exit before you note anything else. These are not just tactical instructions. They are the instructions of someone who knows personally what it looks like when preparation fails, and who cannot offer warmth, but can offer this. Over the next several chapters, we are going to walk through everything. We are going to examine her history, her quests, her relationship with her mother's legacy, and the way all of these pieces fit together into one of the most complex and quietly devastating character portraits in Arc Raiders. But for this chapter, what I want you to take away is the baseline, who Tian Wen is in her daily, functional, moment-to-moment self. Precise, skilled, isolated by choice, but not by preference, carrying something she hasn't named, expressing care through a medium that keeps the care at a safe remove from vulnerability. She is, in the taxonomy of Arc Raiders characters, an outlier. Most of the community's personalities trend toward the communal, toward the warmth that small, embattled communities tend to generate as a survival mechanism. Tian Wen is the exception that proves the rule. The person who exists at the edge of that warmth, close enough to benefit from it, far enough away that it can't reach her in the places where it would do the most good. Why is she an exception? We know the partial answer already. We will know the fuller answer by the time we are done. For now, there is a workbench in a corner of Speranza. There is a woman at that workbench, working on something with the focused intensity of a person who has decided that the work is the most important thing in the room, possibly the most important thing in the world. If you have a broken gun, she will fix it. If you have nothing, she will ignore you. If you have a specific need, she will meet it with a precision that suggests she thought about it before you arrived. If you make the mistake of thanking her too effusively, she will give you the look that has terminated 1,000 conversations in Speranza's corridors. The look that says, "Received, unnecessary, please move on." That look is a whole biography. We're going to read it together. Chapter 4. The Shadow of Major Ivor. Every person is partly made of their parents, whether they want to be or not. The question is not whether the inheritance arrives, but what you do with it once it does. Some people wear their parents' influence openly, as a source of pride or as a wound on display. Some people bury it so deep it becomes the geology they walk on without noticing. Tian Wen belongs to a third category, the most interesting one. The people who are shaped so thoroughly by what a parent was, that they have built their entire identity partly as an ongoing argument with that person's legacy, an argument they cannot stop having, because one of the participants is no longer available to respond. Major Ivor is the absent axis around which Tian Wen's entire personality rotates. She is the fact at the center of the story, the gravity well that everything else orbits. Understanding her is essential to understanding her daughter, which means we need to spend some serious time with what we know about her. Who she was, what she did, what she believed, and what kind of person she raised, even partially, even in the limited time she had. The title Major tells us something immediately. Not at the highest rank, but not low either. Major is a rank that suggests operational authority, a person who commands in the field, who is responsible for the execution of plans made above her and the welfare of the people below her. It is a rank that requires a specific combination of qualities: strategic thinking, the ability to make decisions under pressure, the capacity to project confidence into the people you lead, even when the situation is objectively frightening. These are not easy qualities to combine. People who manage it tend to be the ones their units will follow anywhere. Iva apparently had all of these qualities, because the accounts that filter through the lore of arc raiders speak of her in terms that suggest she was exactly that kind of leader. The kind you follow not because you have to, but because you believe in her assessment of the situation. Because her confidence is grounded in demonstrated competence. Because she has been right before, under conditions that should have broken her. And that track record earns a currency that survives her rank and even, in memory, her death. The Battle of Victory Ridge was the engagement that ended her life and crystallized her legacy. We'll cover the battle in detail in the next chapter. For now, what matters is the shape of her presence in Tian Wen's life before that battle and the shape of the absence she left after it. What was Iva like as a parent? The game doesn't give us direct testimony on this from Tian Wen herself. She is too guarded for that kind of disclosure. But the indirect evidence is substantial. The person Tian Wen became tells us something about the person who raised her. She is disciplined. She has a code rigorously applied. She believes in excellence as a moral position, not just a professional one. She holds herself to standards that she applies equally to others, with neither pride nor apology. She is not sentimental, but she is principled. These qualities, discipline, code, excellence as ethics, principled rigor, are the qualities of someone who was raised by a commanding officer who applied the same standards to their family that they applied to their unit. Did Iva love her daughter? The question may seem strange, but it's worth asking. Not whether she had affection for Tian Wen, that seems obvious from the context, but whether that affection was expressed in the particular idioms that children tend to need: warmth, presence, softness, the experience of being the thing a parent values most, as distinct from the mission, the unit, the cause. Whether Iva's love was legible to a young Tian Wen in the language that love needs to be expressed in, to be received as love rather than just as requirement. The evidence suggests that Iva was, like her daughter, someone whose love was expressed functionally rather than demonstratively. The discipline she appears to have instilled, the values, the standards, these are expressions of caring. They are investments in Tian Wen's capacity to survive and to thrive. They are perhaps the most profound thing a parent in this world can give their child, the tools to persist after the parent is gone. Iva may have known, at some level, that she was building someone who would have to function without her. That possibility is worth sitting with. Was Iva's particular style of parenting, demanding, principled, somewhat austere in its expressiveness, in part a preparation for her own absence? Did she, as a person who operated in extremely dangerous conditions, make certain choices about how to raise Tian Wen precisely because she understood that she might not be there to raise her fully? Did she choose to give Tian Wen strength over softness because she calculated that strength would serve her daughter better in a world that Iva might not be in? If so, it worked. And it broke something too, in the way that things designed for survival often break what they're designed to protect. Because a child raised to be strong, raised to not need too much, raised on the principle that excellence and discipline are the primary expressions of care, that child sometimes grows up uncertain whether they deserved more, unsure how to ask for what wasn't offered, and in the absence of those questions being resolved, building their own version of Iva's architecture, functional, principled, effective, and guarded against the specific form of damage that comes from loving someone who might not come back. When Iva didn't come back, it wasn't just a loss. It was a confirmation of something Tian Wen may have been quietly bracing for her entire life. The thing you build your coping mechanism to absorb eventually arrives, and when it does, the coping mechanism works. You don't collapse, you function, you survive. But functioning is not the same as grieving. You can survive a loss entirely without processing it, and the unprocessed loss sits in the architecture of the self and loads every subsequent choice with a weight that isn't always conscious. That weight is in Tian Wen. You can feel it in the way she talks about certain things, in the particular care she takes to not express need, in the way she assigns worth based entirely on function, on utility, on the demonstrable value of a thing, because things that are merely loved, merely present, merely warm and not useful, can be taken away with no warning and no recourse. But a skill, a craft, the ability to do something so well that the world needs you for it, that cannot be taken away, that persists, that is hers in a way that a person can never be. Ivar's military record, as reconstructed from the fragments available in the law, paints a portrait of someone consistently in the most difficult assignments, not because she was selected against her will, but because she sought them out, volunteered for them, believed in the importance of being at the hard edge of the resistance. This is admirable, and also, if you are her daughter who has grown up watching it, terrifying. There is a specific kind of childhood that you have when one of your parents is a person who regularly puts themselves in mortal danger out of principle. The pride is real, the fear is constant and never entirely spoken about, and the negotiations your young psychology makes between those two things. The way you learn to not show the fear, because showing it feels like questioning the parents' right to choose what they choose. The way you learn to perform pride as the dominant emotion, even when it is not. Those negotiations leave marks. Tian Wen's relationship with raiders is, in part, the adult expression of those childhood negotiations. She admires competence, she is contemptuous of recklessness, she is suspicious of sentiment. She holds herself together with the bolted-down composure of someone who learned very young that showing how much things cost you is a vulnerability, and vulnerability in a dangerous world is an invitation to be hurt. Ivar's legacy in Speranza is a physical presence. Her name likely appears in the settlement's memorial, in the records of those who gave themselves to the defense of humanity. There is an official version of her story, the version that the community maintains. Heroic officer, excellent commander, important figure in the resistance, died at Victory Ridge. This is all true. It is also insufficient, in the way that all official legacies are insufficient. They preserve the achievement while compressing the person. Tian Wen lives in relation to both versions. She knows the official one. She has heard it her entire life. She carries the social weight of it in every interaction where someone recognizes her as Ivar's daughter and adjusts their manner accordingly. She does not particularly appreciate this adjustment. She is not her mother. She did not choose to be her mother's daughter. She was born into that relationship and has been working, ever since, to establish herself on her own terms, which is perhaps the most universal of all the things about her, the thing that makes her most recognizable across the specificity of her context. And then there is the private version of Ivar, the one that Tian Wen has assembled from her own memories, from the things her mother said and did that didn't make it into the official record, from the texture of a childhood spent with a person the community now knows primarily as a symbol. That private version is complicated in ways the official one is not. It contains the specific habits, the particular tone of voice, the things Ivar was good at, and the things she wasn't. The moments of warmth, however functional, that Tian Wen carries with her as the living evidence that the symbol was also, once, a person. There is one object in Tian Wen's workshop that doesn't fit. We will examine it in detail when we get to the relevant quest. For now, know that it exists, that among the tools and the components and the rigorously organized evidence of her professional self, there is a single thing that is there not because it earns its place through function, but because she cannot bring herself to remove it. That object is where the private version of Ivar lives, compressed into a material form, present in the one space Tian Wen controls completely. It is her most private statement of grief, and it is hidden in plain sight. Ivar the commander led people. Ivar the mother, in whatever imperfect and complicated way she managed it, led one person. And in some ways, the most lasting thing she did was not any battle she fought, or any position she held, but the particular human being she shaped, partially and imperfectly, and in too little time, who now stands in a corner of Speranza building weapons that keep other people alive because she could not keep her mother alive. And that transaction, keeping alive, failing to keep alive, is the deepest and most unresolved ledger she carries. This is the shadow under which Tian Wen works. The shadow of a person who was everything she aspires to be, and who disappeared anyway, proving that aspiration does not confer protection, proving that excellence is no guarantee, proving that the world will take what it decides to take, regardless of whether you have earned the right to keep it. She has not forgiven the world for proving that, but she has adapted. That's what she does. Adaptation is her inheritance, her craft, and her wound, all braided into one thing she calls work, and that the rest of Speranza calls survival. The next chapter goes to the battle itself, Victory Ridge. The name everyone knows and nobody fully explains, because explaining it fully would require admitting things that are more complicated than a name carved into a memorial can hold. We are going to go there. We are going to stand on that ridge, in the law, and feel the weight of what it cost. Because you cannot understand what it means to Tian Wen without understanding what happened there. And it matters. Every single bit of it matters. Chapter 5. The Battle of Victory Ridge. Victory Ridge. Two words that mean different things depending on who says them. To the official history of Speranza and the broader resistance, they mean a battle that demonstrated the capacity of organized human forces to engage arc machines and hold ground. A costly but ultimately significant moment in the story of resistance. To the people who were there, or who lost someone there, they mean something considerably more personal and considerably more ambiguous. And to Tian Wen, they mean the day a world ended. Not the world, not the human world in its entirety, but hers, the small, specific world built around one person. Let's reconstruct what we can. Victory Ridge was a tactical engagement. The specific geography matters. A ridge, an elevated position, a location that offered both defensive advantage and strategic value. Whoever controlled Victory Ridge controlled the ability to monitor and potentially intercept arc movement in a specific corridor. Human commanders recognized this value. The decision was made to hold it, to establish a position there, to demonstrate that certain ground could be contested and not simply surrendered. Major Iva was part of the force assigned to this objective. Given her rank and the nature of the engagement, she was likely in a command or senior operational role, directing the deployment of units, coordinating the defense, making the real-time decisions that a battle of this kind requires. This is the work she was trained for and experienced in, and by all accounts, she was very good at it. The initial phase of the battle, as reconstructed from the fragments available in the lore, appears to have gone according to plan. The position was taken, the ridge was held. There is a version of this engagement where it ends there, where the line is established and the machines pull back, and the name Victory Ridge becomes an actual victory, deserving of its name. In that version, Iva comes home. Tian Wen grows up with both her history and her mother. That is not the version that happened. What went wrong is not fully spelled out in the lore. This is one of those silences that Arc Raiders uses to powerful effect, letting the gap do the work that exposition would diminish. But the contours of what happened are implied strongly enough to allow a reconstruction. The machines adapted, or reinforcements arrived, or the intelligence about the scope of the opposition was insufficient, or all three, which is frequently how things go wrong in situations of this kind. The position that seemed defensible became contested in ways that the human force wasn't prepared for, and the transition from offensive success to defensive desperation is one of the most brutal transitions there is in combat, because it happens fast, and the psychological shift required to adapt is enormous. In that transition, people die, not abstractly, specifically, individually, as named people with histories and families and uncompleted lives. In that transition, decisions get made that save some people and sacrifice others. And the people making those decisions are carrying the weight of knowing that the outcome of their choices will be measured in the people who do and don't come back. Iva made those decisions. She was in that role, and she did not come back from it. The details of her death are not provided with clinical specificity, and that is probably right. What the law provides is the shape of it. A commanding officer who held her ground past the point of reasonable hope, who made certain that the people under her command had the cover they needed to extract, while she and a reduced force continued to engage, who understood what she was choosing in making that choice, and made it anyway. This is the portrait of a person dying in a manner entirely consistent with how she lived, placing others' survival above her own, accepting the cost of command with the same precision she applied to everything else. It is devastating. It is also, in the grammar of this world and this character, completely coherent. The news arrived in Speranza through whatever channels were operational at the time. A casualty report, a transmission, the carefully controlled delivery of information that military institutions have developed for exactly this situation. How it reached Tian Wen specifically, who delivered it, and how, in what words, in what context, these details are not given. But we know what happened after. A young person who had grown up with a parent who operated at the hard edge of the world received the confirmation of the thing she had been, consciously or not, bracing for. The community responded to Ivor's death as it responds to the deaths of significant figures, with collective grief that is also, in some ways, a kind of collective performance, memorial, recognition, the former language of loss applied to a person who now belongs to history. For the community, this is how they honor her. For Tian Wen, the community's grief is its own kind of burden. The experience of watching the person you've lost being processed into a symbol, stripped of the specific weight of being your parent, and reconstituted as something the community can carry more easily than the messy, private, specific thing that your loss actually is. She would not have said this. She is not the kind of person to articulate her own grief in social terms, to complain about the inadequacy of collective mourning as a vehicle for personal loss. But the effect is there in how she subsequently positions herself relative to that collective, at the edge of it, in functional relation with it, not inside it, not fully within the community's warmth, not fully dependent on its consolation, maintaining the distance of someone who has decided that the transaction of grief is private and not a debt she owes the public. Victory Ridge, as a name, takes on its particular irony in this context. The battle is called Victory in the official record because the ground was held, because the objective was achieved, because by the metrics that military history applies, the humans won. And they did hold it. And it was significant. But the victory was purchased with costs that the name does nothing to acknowledge. The specific people who were present at that cost, who were paid out of that currency, who are now compressed into a number in the casualty report, rather than expanded into the complexity of everything they were and left behind. Tian Wen knows the real currency of Victory Ridge. She paid it from her own account. The strategic implications of the battle, what it meant for the broader resistance, what it demonstrated about the possibility of holding arc incursions, what tactical doctrine it informed, these are things she is presumably aware of, given the community she lives in and the discussions that would have happened around her as she grew up. But they are not the things that live in her body when the name is spoken. What lives there is smaller and bigger than strategy. What lives there is a specific person who is no longer in the world. Raiders who work with Tian Wen for long enough, who earn the kind of sustained interaction that her questline represents, sometimes notice that Victory Ridge exists in her the way that certain injuries exist in the body. Not always visible, not always painful, but present in the slight change of movement when you reach in a particular direction. She doesn't talk about it. She wouldn't welcome being asked about it, but it shapes the way she moves through her world, the particular angles from which she approaches things, the places she habitually doesn't look directly at. The Battle of Victory Ridge also represents something for the wider law of arc raiders, the clearest illustration of the cost of the resistance that exists in the game. It is the event that most directly shows what it looks like when humanity tries to hold ground against the arc, and what that holding costs. It is, in that sense, the moral center of gravity of the entire setting, the place where the meaning of everything else in the game's world is most legible, because it shows you exactly what is at stake, and exactly what the price of being at stake is. That Tian Wen is the daughter of the battle's most prominent casualty is not incidental to this. She is, in some deep narrative sense, the living consequence of the battle. She is the cost given a body and a life and a workbench. Every gun she builds is built by someone who knows, specifically and personally, what guns are ultimately for, not in the abstract sense of defense and resistance, but in the most concrete, irreversible sense of what happens when they don't do enough. She builds them to be as good as they can possibly be, because she knows that good enough isn't actually good enough. She has evidence. The raiders she works with face the same machines that killed Ivor. Different machines, technically. Different units, different deployments, different specifics, but the same system, the same indifferent program running to completion. the same capacity to end a specific person forever regardless of what that person meant to someone else. When Tian Wen builds a weapon, she is building it against that. She is putting her skill in opposition to the thing that took her mother, in the only terms available to her, in the only language she has. This is why her craft is not just a job. It is not even just a vocation. It is a war, fought in miniature, at a workbench, with tools and tolerances, and the accumulated knowledge of a person who needed to be this good and made herself this good because nothing less would do. Every weapon she produces is a small battle. Every Raiders who comes back alive is a battle she contributed to winning. She doesn't see it in these terms, or at least she would never describe it in these terms. The language is too emotional, too transparent about the connection she works hard to not display. But the logic is there in the work, in the extra effort, in the standards she holds herself to. Victory Ridge was a battle humanity fought over a piece of high ground. Tian Wen fights the same battle every day, at a lower elevation and with different tools, over the specific, irreplaceable piece of high ground that is a living human being going into a dangerous world and coming back out of it. She wins more often than she loses, but she never forgets that the game is not won, and that the machines are still out there, still running their program, still indifferent to everything she has built and everything she has lost and everything she keeps building in the shadow of everything she was never able to keep. That is the battle she was born into. That is the war she wages. And the weapons she builds are her answer to a question that Victory Ridge asked and that she has been answering, with steel and skill and the silence of someone who has decided that the answer is in the doing and not in the saying, ever since. Let's move now to the craft itself, to what she actually does, how she does it, what excellence looks like in her hands, and why the Raiders of Speranza know, whatever else they might think of her personality, that a weapon built by Tian Wen is the best chance they have against everything the world has decided to send at them. Chapter 6. The Forge of Survival. Tian Wen's craft. There is a specific kind of mastery that is different from expertise. Expertise is deep knowledge, comprehensive understanding, the ability to operate at high levels within a defined domain. Mastery is something beyond that. It is the point at which knowledge becomes reflexive, where the understanding is so thoroughly integrated into the practitioner's body and mind that it is no longer experienced as knowledge, but as instinct. The expert thinks about what they're doing. The master has thought so much, and for so long, that the thinking has become movement, has become sight, has become the particular quality of attention that lets you see into a mechanism the way some people seem to see into a situation, without effort, without sequence, just suddenly knowing. Tian Wen is a master. This is not in dispute within Speranza, not a matter of opinion, but of observable fact. The people who have worked with her long enough to assess the quality of her output, who have enough technical knowledge to distinguish her work from competent work, are consistent on this point. What she does is not simply very good. It is categorically different from what the next tier down is capable of. The gaps in her work, the tolerances, the stress distributions, the surface finishes, the timing of mechanical actions, are consistently at levels that represent not just the application of skill, but the expression of understanding so deep that it produces results beyond what conscious execution can achieve. How she got to this level is a story told partly by the years. She started working with tools earlier than most, driven by the specific combination of temperament and circumstance that we've already examined, and partly by the particular character of her intelligence, which has always been synthetic rather than merely accumulative. She doesn't just know things about weapons. She understands them in the sense of understanding a language, not just the vocabulary and grammar, but the logic beneath the grammar, the reason the system works the way it works, rather than some other way, the implications of that logic for what it can and cannot do. This level of understanding allows her to do things that look like intuition, but are actually the product of a mechanism so refined it outpaces conscious thought. When she handles a weapon she hasn't seen before, she knows within a few minutes what it can do, what it can't do, what modifications would improve it, and what modifications would seem to improve it, but would actually compromise something invisible at a higher level of function. She reads mechanisms the way some people read faces, not through a checklist of features but through a holistic impression. that synthesizes more information than it could explicitly enumerate. The weapons she builds from scratch are different again from the ones she repairs and modifies. Building from scratch is where you see the design philosophy, the choices she makes about how to distribute stress, how to balance weight, how to design for reliability in conditions that range from pristine to catastrophic. Her weapons are not beautiful in the aesthetic sense. She has no interest in aesthetic beauty in this context. They are beautiful in the engineering sense, which is to say they are designed so well that the design becomes its own visual argument for its own correctness. They look the way they do because they are what they are. And what they are is a system optimized at every level for one purpose: to work correctly when a human life depends on it working correctly. In a world where that dependency is the normal condition, this philosophy is not abstract. Every trigger pull that sends a round where it needs to go in the fraction of a second when it needs to go there is the consequence of thousands of small decisions made at a workbench by a person who took every one of those decisions. Seriously, Tian Wen doesn't build abstract weapons. She builds the specific object that will be in a specific person's hands in a specific moment, when everything depends on it. That is the weight she carries into every piece of work, and it is why the work never becomes routine for her, in the way that skilled repetitive tasks often become routine for skilled practitioners. For Tian Wen, routine is not available. The weight of consequence prevents it. Every component she inspects knowing that it is a component in a system that a person will stake their life on. The inspection, therefore, is never casual. It is always, at some level, an act of engagement with the reality of what this thing is for. She cannot achieve the pleasant dissociation of purely mechanical labor because she never lets herself forget what the mechanical labor is in service of. This makes her exhausting to work with, from the perspective of anyone who needs the pace of a job to flag her standards. She doesn't let them. She cannot. The standards are not imposed from outside. They are her own, generated by her own understanding of what the work requires, and she is incapable of the kind of selective attention that would allow her to apply them only to the visible parts while cutting corners on what won't be checked. What she teaches, or rather what she demonstrates to the rare raiders who spend enough time around her to learn from observation, is that this level of engagement is not the product of willpower. It is the product of having integrated the value of the work into the deepest level of professional identity. Having arrived at a point where doing the work less than fully would be felt not as a shortcut, but as a betrayal of something fundamental about who you are and what you're here to do. You can't will yourself to that point. You have to have built yourself there, brick by brick, through years of choosing the hard standard over the easy one, until the hard standard becomes the only one your system recognizes. Tian Wen has built herself there. It is the most complete thing about her. In a life that has been defined by loss and the construction of protective distance, her craft is the one domain where she is fully present, fully committed, not at a remove, but entirely in it. The work is not a refuge from the rest of her life. It is the part of her life where she is most alive. She works with a specific set of tools that she has assembled and maintained over years, each one selected for the specific function it serves, each one cared for with an exactingness that most people reserve for the weapons themselves. Her tools are not simply instruments. They are collaborators. They are the interface between her understanding and the material she works with, and the quality of that interface matters to the quality of what she produces. A tool that is off, microscopically misaligned, fractionally dulled, imperceptibly unbalanced, is a tool that introduces error into the work, and error in her work is not an abstraction to be statistically managed. It is an unacceptable possibility. So, she maintains the tools. She knows each one's history, knows when it was last calibrated, and what it was used for, and what cumulative wear it has absorbed. She carries this knowledge the way some people carry the history of relationships, with the particular intimacy of someone for whom these specific objects have been the primary instruments of expression over a long and important stretch of life. Her tools are the things she trusts most completely in her world. They are, in the emotional vocabulary we are using to understand her, her closest companions. There are several specific types of weapon that she is particularly known for. High-precision work, the kind that requires holding tolerances that push the practical limits of what can be achieved by hand in a workshop environment that is not, by any stretch, a precision manufacturing facility. She has solved, through ingenuity and accumulated problem solving, many of the issues that make such precision difficult in field conditions. Her solutions are not always orthodox. Some of them would confuse a traditional armorer. But they work, which is the only standard she applies. She is also known for her repair work on damaged weapons. This is in some ways the more revealing domain, because repair requires not just understanding how a weapon should work, but understanding how this specific weapon has failed, why it failed in this specific way, what the failure pattern reveals about the stresses it has been subjected to, and how to address the root cause rather than just the symptom. Her diagnostic process is fast and thorough, and the repairs she produces are not simply functional. They are often improvements, the weapon emerging from her hands better than it was when it arrived, because she identified latent issues that the owner wasn't aware of and corrected for them as a matter of course. This has a social dimension in Speranza that is worth noting. Raiders bring their weapons to Tian Wen for repair, and she gives them back improved. This is the concrete form in which her care expresses itself, not in warmth, not in expressed interest in the raider as a person, but in the extra work she put into their weapon, because she cannot give them anything less. They experience this as quality of service. It is, beneath the professionalism, something considerably closer to concern for their well-being. But the concern is encoded in metal, expressed in the language she is actually fluent in, and received as competence because that is the code it was transmitted in. The workshops of Speranza all have their particular smells, oil and solder, and the specific tang of metal being worked. Tian Wen's space has these, but also something else, something harder to name. The concentration of a specific person's attention accumulated over years. A space where someone has worked hard and carefully for a long time develops a quality that is more than just the smell of its materials. It develops the quality of accumulated purpose, and that quality is real in a way that is felt before it is understood. People who come to her workshop often report feeling, whatever their opinion of her personality, that they are in the presence of something being done with genuine seriousness, that seriousness is not performed. It is the ambient product of a person doing work they take completely seriously, and it is one of the more consistent experiences associated with her space. Even people who find her difficult, who are put off by her bluntness and her impatience and her general unwillingness to maintain social pleasantries, tend to describe this quality of her workshop with a kind of reluctant respect. Whatever else she is the real thing. The craft gives her stability. In a world that has demonstrated its capacity for instability at the most personal possible level, the consistency of mastery, the fact that the metal behaves according to its properties, that the physics of mechanism operates by its rules, that skill applied to problem produces the same class of outcome across the infinite variation of specific problems, is something that she has organized much of her psychological life around. It is not exciting in the way that the resistance is exciting, not heroic in the way that raiders like to present their own work as heroic. But it is reliable, and reliability, for Tian Wen, outweighs almost everything. The quests she gives raiders are extensions of the craft, understood broadly. They are assignments that she can only complete with material that exists outside the walls of Speranza, in the broken and dangerous world that raiders navigate. She cannot go herself, not because she lacks the capability, which is ambiguous, but because her function is here, at the bench, doing the work that only she can do, while raiders do the field work that they are better positioned to do. It is a division of labor that she accepts with some reluctance, because she prefers to do things herself, and the act of delegation is an act of trust that costs her something. When she delegates a quest to a raider, she is trusting them not just with a task, but with a piece of what she needs to do her work. That piece might be a component, a piece of intelligence, a specific recovered object. Whatever it is, it matters to her in a way that the neutral professional framing of the quest text doesn't fully communicate. When she asks for something to be found and retrieved, there is a reason. It is exactly that thing and not something else, and that reason is connected to her craft, her project, and often, beneath the practical framing, to something considerably more personal. This is where the quests become the most interesting form of lore. Each one is a window into something she would never discuss directly. Each one is a translation of a personal need into a practical assignment, encoded in the language of professionalism, because that's the only language she operates in publicly. Reading the quests is reading the autobiography she would never write, and that is what we are going to do for the next several chapters. But before we go to the quests, let's close this chapter with an appreciation of what she has built. Not just the weapons, but the entire enterprise of her mastery. In a world that has taken much from her, she has built something that cannot be taken. The knowledge is hers, the skill is hers, the standards are hers. No machine can process them away, no battle can strip them out of her. No loss can unmake what she has spent years building in the one domain she has always been able to control. That is not a small thing. In the economy of human survival in this world, it is arguably the most important thing there is. She would not describe it in these terms. She would say she does what she does because it needs doing. She would say the weapons need to be right because lives depend on them being right. She would say this is just work, but the care in the work is the self in the work, and the self in the work is the person, and the person is everything we've talked about in this chapter and everything that came before. It's all in there, all of it. Every loss and every adaptation, everything she was and everything she decided to become, translated into tolerances and finishes and the particular way a trigger breaks clean and sends a round exactly where it needs to go. That's Tian Wen. That's the forge. Let's go to the quests. Chapter 7. Marked for Death. The first quest. Marked for Death. It's the kind of title that might sound generic on first encounter, a quest name that could belong to any number of action game missions, with its blunt declaration of violence and consequence. But like most things associated with Tian Wen, the surface presentation is worth looking beneath. Because Marked for Death, when you examine what it actually involves, what it asks you to find, and where it asks you to go, and what the chain of discovery reveals, is a much more deliberate and purposeful piece of storytelling than the name alone suggests. Let's start with the structure of the quest, because the structure itself is informative. Tian Wen doesn't give you a simple pick up and deliver assignment. That's not her style, and you'll notice, across all her quests, a consistent preference for the multi-stage, evidence-following format. The kind of assignment that requires not just physical competence, but sustained attention. The ability to track a thread through an environment and follow it to its conclusion. She designs missions the way she builds weapons, for the user who is paying attention, not for the user who is going through the motions. Marked for Death begins in the buried city. Specifically, it begins with the location of a cache, a hidden stash of items placed deliberately in a location that is both protected and difficult to reach. The cache is near the Sandam/San Duranti warehouse, a landmark that places the objective in a specific part of the buried city's commercial district. If the layered infrastructure of that area can be called commercial in anything but the archaeological sense, the Sandam/San Duranti warehouse is itself a piece of the world's lore. It names a company or companies that operated in this space before the world became what it is now. The name is a fragment of the before, the commercial infrastructure of a civilization that believed in warehouses and supply chains and the reliable movement of goods between producers and consumers. Walking through that space now, with the weight of everything that has happened between then and now, the warehouse is a monument to a kind of confidence that the world can no longer sustain. Things were made here. Things were stored here. Things moved through here on a schedule, with a purpose, as part of a system that assumed its own continuation. That system is gone. What remains is the building, the space, the ghost of the function it once served. And in that space, someone has placed a cache. Who placed the cache? This is where Marked for Death begins to get interesting. The quest doesn't announce this information. It lets you discover it through the process of following the evidence. You find the cache first. Then you find something in the cache that leads you to something else. Then that something else leads you somewhere. The pattern is archaeological. You're not just running an errand. You're reading a site, following the logic of someone else's presence through the evidence they left behind. The footsteps are the key element in this quest's design. After the cache, you follow footsteps, tracks in the dust and debris of the buried city, evidence of someone who came through this space with something to carry and something to hide. Following footsteps in a game environment is always a meaningful design choice because it is the most literal possible expression of walking in someone else's path. You are reenacting their movement. You are going where they went, at the cadence they went there, through the environment as they experienced it. In Tian Wen's quest, the footsteps lead to scrap metal. This is the destination, a location where scrap metal was deposited or cached or left for a specific reason. The scrap metal is at the surface level a material objective. Bring back the scrap, complete the quest, receive the reward. But like most things in this quest line, the material surface points towards something beneath it. Scrap metal in the world of Ark Raiders is not simply refuse, it is the residue of the world that was processed material, manufactured components, the leftovers of human industry now existing in the form of raw resource. Finding it, retrieving it, putting it to use is the basic economic activity of the buried city runs. But when Tian Wen asks for specific scrap in a specific location, identified through a chain of evidence that includes a cache and footsteps, the scrap is not interchangeable. It came from somewhere specific. Someone knew it was there. Someone went to some trouble to either place or preserve that knowledge. The question marked for death implicitly asks is, who was doing the marking and who was going to die? The title suggests an identified target, someone or something singled out. In the context of what the quest finds, this suggests that the cache, the footsteps, the scrap metal are all parts of a preparation. Someone was preparing for something, and the preparation has now been interrupted or abandoned, and Tian Wen has sent you to retrieve the evidence and the material of that preparation. Why does she need this? She doesn't entirely explain. This is characteristic of how she assigns quests. She tells you what to find and where to find it. She does not always explain why, and she does not respond to requests for more context with anything beyond the information she has already given you. If you want to work for her, you trust that she has reasons. The reasons, as you gather more context across the entire quest line, become more legible, but they are never fully transparent, never fully stated, always requiring the same kind of reading she applies to mechanisms, understanding through inference from evidence rather than through explicit explanation. The buried city, as the setting for this first significant quest, is itself a statement. She is not sending you somewhere easy. She is not asking you to retrieve something from a safe location with minimal Ark presence and a clear extraction route. She is sending you into the most complex and challenging environment in the game's geography, to find something that requires following clues rather than just coordinates, to navigate layers of infrastructure that are hostile to navigation, to trust your own ability to read an environment and track a thread through it. This is a test, not a cynical one, not a hazing ritual, but a genuine assessment. She needs to know if you're the kind of raider who can do what she actually needs done. The first quest is the qualifier. If you do it wrong, if you miss the clues, if you go to the wrong place, or retrieve the wrong material, or fail to follow the footsteps to where they lead, you demonstrate something about your attention and your capability that she will factor into subsequent assignments. If you do it right, you demonstrate something else, that you are the kind of person she can trust with more complex things, because the things she needs are going to become considerably more complex. The physical experience of navigating the buried city during this quest is part of what makes it memorable. The warehouse district is a specific architectural environment, large, relatively open compared to some of the tighter corridors of the buried city, but with its own spatial challenges. The ceilings, whatever was above them, are not always intact. Light comes from unexpected sources. The floor plan, designed for industrial movement of goods, is now a maze reshaped by collapse and debris into something that requires constant reassessment of the navigation assumptions you brought in. Raiders who know the buried city well talk about the specific smells of different areas. The warehouse district has the smell of old industry, metal dust and decay, and something chemical that used to be cargo and is now just atmospheric trace. It is not unpleasant, exactly. It is just the smell of a place that was built for a purpose that ended, and is now existing in the long afterward of that ending. There is a specific quality of sadness in the architecture of abandoned industry that is different from the sadness of abandoned domestic spaces. Less personal, more systemic, the mourning of a network rather than a household. Following footsteps through this space is following something human through something systemic. Someone walked here. Someone had a reason. Someone moved through this industrial ghost with purpose, with something to carry, with a specific destination in mind. The tracks in the dust are the trace of intention, and intention in an environment like this feels almost sacred. The evidence that even in the aftermath of everything, people make plans and carry things and go to specific places for specific reasons. When you find the scrap metal at the end of the trail, the quest objective resolves. But the story doesn't entirely resolve. There is a gap between the material objective and the full context, a gap that Tian Wen's delivery and the quest's design leave deliberately open. You have found what she needed. You have brought it back. She will receive it with her characteristic efficiency. But the story of who left the cache and who followed the footsteps and what was being marked and for what death, that story sits in the gap, implied but not stated, available for the player who wants to reach into it. This is sophisticated quest design. It treats the player as someone who might care about the story beneath the objective, and it creates space for that caring without requiring it. You can do this quest as a pure errand and that's fine. Or you can do it as an act of reading and receive something considerably richer. For our purposes, a comprehensive lore analysis, we read it. And what we read suggests that Tian Wen is not just using raiders to retrieve materials, she is using them to recover pieces of a story that she is assembling or reassembling, a story that is connected to something more personal than gun maintenance. The specific locations, the specific objects, the specific chains of evidence, these are not randomly generated. They reflect a knowledge she already has about where things are and who put them there, a knowledge that is the product of history she has not fully disclosed. Who was marked? That is the question the quest leaves with you. And if the answer we eventually come to, through the accumulation of this entire quest line, through the pattern of what she asks for and where she sends you, is what it appears to be, then Marked for Death is not about a present danger. It is about a past one, and about the specific form of grief that involves going back to the places a lost person touched and retrieving what they left there. We will return to this interpretation as the quest line develops. For now, note it as a possibility and carry it with you as we move into the second quest, because the quests in sequence build meaning together that they don't entirely achieve individually. They are the chapters of the autobiography she would never write. And you only read the autobiography correctly if you read the chapters in relation to each other. The buried city will feature again, the underground layers, the industrial ghost, the following of specific trails through specific spaces. These are the geography of Tian Wen's inner landscape, translated into mission objectives. Understanding why she keeps returning there is understanding something essential about what she is still working through and what she needs, at some level she doesn't consciously acknowledge, to complete. She is building something, not just weapons, something else, assembled from pieces she sends raiders to recover, across a geography that is the physical record of what happened to the world she was born into. The quests are the process of that assembly, and Marked for Death is the first piece. Let's go get the next one. Chapter 8. Broken Monument. Piecing together the past. Broken Monument. Even the title has a different quality from the first quest, where Marked for Death suggests something active, something happening now, a threat identified and targeted. Broken Monument is retrospective. A monument is something built to last, something built to be remembered by. A broken monument is a memorial that failed in its primary function. It could not persist. It was there, and then something broke it, and now it is pieces. The title alone could be a description of Tian Wen's relationship with her mother's memory. The official monument, the community's memorial, the name carved into the Resistance's records. These are functional. They persist. But the personal monument, the one built from specific memories and private knowledge, and the particular weight of that specific loss, that one has been tested by time and distance, and the daily work of surviving in a world that doesn't stop for grief. And it has not entirely survived that testing. It is a broken monument. And Broken Monument, the quest, in the reading I'm proposing, is about the attempt to repair it. Let's examine the structure. Broken Monument is an object collection quest, but it is a very specific kind of object collection quest. 3 items, 3 different locations, 3 objects that are not on the surface obviously connected to each other, but that carry a relationship when you understand the context they come from. The compass from the scrapyard, the videotape from the containers, the field rations from the raider camp, one by one. The compass first. A compass is a navigation instrument, a device for orienting yourself in the world, for knowing which direction is north, and using that knowledge to determine all other directions from it. In a practical context, within arc raiders, a compass is a useful piece of equipment for field work in environments where other navigation methods are unreliable. Its presence in the scrapyard, the designated location for salvageable materials, the place where the useful and the broken coexist in the ongoing process of human resourcefulness, is not surprising, but consider what a compass represents beyond its practical function. It is an instrument of not being lost. It is the physical embodiment of orientation, of knowing where you are in relation to everything else, of having a reliable reference point in an environment that might otherwise disorient you completely. It is, in the symbolic vocabulary that this quest appears to be operating in, something that tells you where you stand. Tian Wen needs something that tells her where she stands. She is, in the deepest layer of what we've been exploring, a person who has been navigating without a reliable reference point for a long time. The moral and emotional compass that might have been provided by continued presence, continued relationship, continued guidance, has been absent since Victory Ridge. What she has instead is the self she built, competent, oriented toward work, but the question of where she stands relative to the larger geography of who she is and what she's lost and what she's still carrying, that navigation has never quite been resolved. The compass from the scrapyard is not just a tool she needs for practical purposes. It is, I think, a piece of something she is assembling that means more than its components, but we'll get to the assembly. The videotape from the containers. Here is where the quest becomes most explicitly personal. A videotape is a recording medium, a physical object that contains captured time, a moment or sequence of moments preserved in the material of the tape as magnetic information that can be translated back into image and sound. It is the closest thing available, in the technology of its era, to actual preserved time. A videotape is a portal. You play it back, and the time it contains comes forward. In the context of arc raiders, videotapes are relics. The infrastructure to play them is not guaranteed to be present or functional. They require a specific technology to decode their contents. They represent a particular era in human recording history. Before digital, which in the world of this game means before the things that were digitized, were lost in whatever digital infrastructure collapse accompanied or followed the Ark's arrival. What persists on tape persists in a form that is more robust in certain ways than digital. Fragile in its own ways, but not dependent on servers or networks or the continued functioning of systems that may no longer be operational. Someone recorded something on this tape. The tape is in the containers, storage containers presumably, in one of the buried city's logistical zones, where things were packed and sealed and saved against the possibility of future use. Someone put this tape in storage. Someone preserved it. What is on it? The quest doesn't tell you directly. You retrieve it, you bring it back. Tian Wen receives it with the controlled expression that she brings to everything, and what she does with it subsequently is not narrated in the quest's text. But the fact that she sends a raider to retrieve it, that it appears in the list of 3 specific items she needs from 3 specific locations, means it is not an incidental object. It is a piece of something. The most resonant possibility, given everything we know about Tian Wen and the shape of what the questline appears to be about, is that this tape contains something of her mother. A recording, military briefing, personal message, documentation of some kind, something that captures Iva's presence in the preserved timed format of magnetic tape, waiting in the containers of the buried city for someone who knew where to look. The field rations from the raider camp. This might seem like the most mundane of the 3 objects. Field rations are practical sustenance, food engineered for durability and portability and caloric efficiency in field conditions. They are the baseline material of any extended operation, the thing that keeps people functional when there is no infrastructure to support regular meals. Every raider camp has them. They are not inherently significant, except that these specific field rations from this specific raider camp are significant enough to be one of the 3 items in this quest, listed alongside a compass and a videotape. That specificity is the signal. It is not field rations in general. It is these, from here. And the question of why these particular rations matter enough to include in a collection with these other two objects leads, when you think about it carefully, toward a specific kind of answer. These are someone's field rations, not rations in general, but rations associated with a specific operation, preserved in or around a specific raider camp. In the logic of the quest, where each object comes from a specific location that is not interchangeable with other locations of the same type, the rations come from a camp that has significance beyond the generic function of being a place where raiders camp. This camp is associated with someone or something specific, and the rations are evidence of that association, evidence of a specific person's specific presence in a specific time. A compass, a videotape, field rations. What do these three things have in common? They are all objects of orientation and sustenance and record. They are the things a person needs and carries and uses in the field. They are, assembled together, almost a portrait of a field soldier, the instruments and evidence of someone who operated in exactly the environments that Tian Wen cannot enter, and that her mother operated in. They are, in their combination, something close to a reliquary. A reliquary is a container for relics, for objects associated with a saint or significant person, objects that carry the trace of a presence that is no longer accessible directly, but that persists in the material. Churches built them to hold the fragments of sacred lives. In the secular and pragmatic world of arc raiders, a raider workshop might hold something similar. Not sacred, but imbued with the kind of personal significance that transforms an ordinary object into something that carries more than its material weight. This is what Tian Wen appears to be assembling. Not a monument in the official sense. She would have nothing to do with official monuments, but a private record, a material collection, the artifacts of a specific life arranged in a specific space, in a workshop that is the most completely hers of anywhere in the world. A way of holding the pieces of her mother's presence in a form she can touch and maintain, the way she touches and maintains the weapons she builds. A way of keeping something alive through material care when the original source of that presence is no longer available to be cared for. Broken monument. The monument is broken. She is trying, one quest at a time, one retrieved object at a time, to find the pieces and bring them back together into something that holds. Not an official memorial, not a public ceremony, something private and specific and assembled with the same care she applies to everything she builds, in the one language she fully trusts, the language of objects maintained and arranged by hands that understand their value. The scrapyard, the containers, the raider camp, three locations with three different spatial qualities. The scrapyard is industrial, layered with the accumulated debris of many different kinds of failure and abandonment. The containers are logistical, a space designed for the temporary preservation of things in transit, now serving the indefinite preservation of things that no longer have anywhere to transit to. The raider camp is operational, the current working edge of human activity in a dangerous space, the place where the resistance is most actively and recently present. Navigating between these three locations across the quest is navigating between three different relationships with time and purpose. The scrapyard is the long-term aftermath. The containers are the interrupted present. The raider camp is the active continuation. And Tian Wen needs a piece from each of them, which is to say, she needs something from every layer of what happened, and what is happening, and what persists between them. This is one of the most formally elegant quests in the game, if the reading I'm proposing is anywhere near the right one. It uses the basic game mechanic of object collection. Go here, find this, bring it back, to do something that most games wouldn't even attempt at the quest design level. It creates a privately meaningful assembly from publicly indifferent materials. The rations and the compass and the videotape are all usable goods in the Arc Raiders economy. Their non-interchangeability, their specific locations, their combination in this particular quest. This is what elevates them from inventory items to story. What Tian Wen does with these objects after the quest is complete is not shown. The camera, so to speak, doesn't follow her home and watch her arrange them on a shelf or in a drawer. The gap between the delivery of the objects and the private meaning she makes from them is left entirely to the player's imagination. This is correct. This is the appropriate design choice. Some things are most powerful when they are partially withheld, when the imagination is invited to complete what the narrative cannot quite say without diminishing in the saying. What we can infer, she handles them carefully. She places them with the same attention to significance that she places her tools, but with a different kind of attention. The attention given to things valued not for their function, but for what they carry. She knows what they are. She has known for some time what they are, and where they are, and what it would take to get them. She has been not getting them for long enough that sending a raider for them is a decision that required something. And she made that decision now, in this particular moment of her story, which suggests that something has changed, some threshold passed, some resolution formed, some layer of the protective distance she keeps eroded just enough to let this through. Whatever prompted the erosion, whatever made this the moment she decided to retrieve these pieces, it is not explained. It exists in the gap between the quest's surface and its depth, in the silence that arc raiders construct so carefully around Tian Wen's most personal business. And it is precisely in that silence that the character becomes most fully real, most fully a person rather than a function, most fully someone whose life contains dimensions that the work cannot entirely account for. Broken Monument asks you to help put something back together, not a physical monument. The objects don't form a statue or a marker when assembled, but a monument of the self, built from the specific material of a specific life, maintained against the entropy of loss in the only way available to someone like Tian Wen, through care, through attention, through the deliberate act of not forgetting what certain things mean, even when forgetting might be easier. She doesn't forget. That is the most fundamental thing about her when you strip away all the other qualities and get to the core. She does not forget. And Broken Monument is the quest that shows you that fact most clearly. Chapter 9, Industrial Espionage. War by other means, if marked for death, and Broken Monument are quests that operate in the register of personal archaeology, of recovering things from a specific past for specific private reasons, then Industrial Espionage marks a shift into something more immediately operational, more explicitly connected to the ongoing work of the resistance and Tian Wen's professional life as it intersects with the larger political and tactical landscape of Speranza's world. But the shift is not as complete as it first appears. Industrial Espionage, on its surface, is a sabotage mission. You are asked to do two things: deliver a specific weapon, a Beretta, to a cache near the buried city gas station, and plant a bug. The first action is logistical. The second is intelligence gathering. Together, they constitute an act of industrial sabotage against whatever operation is running in or through the area near that gas station, an operation that Tian Wen has determined warrants surveillance and disruption. Let's start with the Beretta. This weapon appears in the quest as a required delivery item, a specific gun that needs to end up in a specific place. The Beretta, within Arc Raiders, is a weapon with a particular identity. It is associated with a level of craft and specification that marks it as a deliberate choice by whoever designed the delivery requirement. This isn't a generic firearm. It has characteristics, ballistic, ergonomic, material, that make it the right tool for whatever role it is being placed to fulfill. The fact that Tian Wen is routing this specific weapon through a cache near the gas station tells us something about the operation she is supporting or creating. She is equipping someone, or she is ensuring that a specific capability exists at a specific location for use under specific circumstances. The weapon's presence there is not accidental and not incidental. It is a calculated positioning of a specific capability, and the calculation has been made by someone who understands exactly what that capability is and what conditions it will need to function under. That someone is Tian Wen. This is her operation. The weapon she specified, the location she chose, the timing of the delivery. These are the decisions of a person running an intelligence or resistance operation from the back room of a weapon workshop, using the cover of her professional role to conduct activities that extend considerably beyond professional weapon maintenance. This is a new dimension of the character, and it's an important one. Tian Wen is not just a craftsperson. She is an actor in the resistance in ways that are not publicly visible. ways that use her access and her knowledge and her position at the crossroads of radar activity to conduct operations that serve the larger cause of human survival against the Ark and whatever human-level threats are also operating in the space. Because the gas station and its environs are not just an Ark territory, there are human operations running through the buried city that are not aligned with Speranza's interests, and Tian Wen has identified one of them as worth watching. The bug is the mechanism of that watching, a planted surveillance device that will gather information she can use to understand what is happening there, who is involved, what they're planning, and how to respond to or disrupt it. The combination of the weapon delivery and the bug planting in a single mission is elegant from a tactical standpoint. The weapon delivery provides plausible cover for the approach. A raider going to a cache near the gas station to deposit a weapon is doing something that could be explained in terms of standard raider logistics, if questioned. The bug planting is the actual objective, the one that creates ongoing value. One action provides cover for the other, and both actions require the same physical location and the same approach vectors. Tian Wen has thought this through. This is not improvisation. This is the product of careful planning by someone who has been thinking about this location and this operation for some time, who knows the terrain and the patterns of activity well enough to have designed a mission that achieves its objective with minimum exposure. The professional discipline that produces her weapon craft is here applied to intelligence operations, with the same thoroughness and the same attention to getting things exactly right. But there is a question under the surface of this quest, as there is under every quest she gives. Who or what is she targeting? What operation has attracted her surveillance? The gas station and its surrounding area are not generic. They are a specific location in the buried city with specific significance, a place where something is happening that she needs to understand better before she can address it. The buried city gas station, like the warehouse, is a monument to the infrastructure of the world that was. Gas stations are landmarks of mobility, points in a transportation network that kept vehicles moving and people traveling between places. The infrastructure that kept them supplied is gone. The fuel they dispensed is either exhausted or repurposed. But the building, the space, the parking lot, and the canopy and the remnant of the systems that once operated there, these persist as a specific kind of space, recognizable to anyone who knew the before, anonymous to anyone who didn't. In the current use patterns of the buried city, a gas station space is transitional, large enough for operational use, sheltered enough to provide cover, connected to the surrounding street network in a way that offers multiple approach and exit vectors. It is the kind of space that gets repurposed for activities that benefit from a certain degree of visibility without full exposure, activities that need space and access, but not permanent infrastructure. It is, in short, exactly the kind of location you'd use for an operation you wanted to be able to vacate quickly. Someone is using it that way. Tian Wen knows this. The bug will tell her more about who and what and when. The weapon will enable a response when she decides one is necessary. Industrial espionage is the setup for something that the questline doesn't fully complete. The planting of the capability that will be used in a subsequent action she hasn't yet tipped her hand about. This is the kind of long-game thinking that you expect from a person who has been living in this world for as long as she has. She does not solve problems reactively. She positions herself to solve them before they fully crystallize, before the problem has declared itself loudly enough to demand an emergency response. She prefers to be the person who already has the answer when the question becomes unavoidable. Industrial espionage is a piece of that preference, the preparation for a solution to a problem that hasn't quite arrived yet, made in advance of its arrival. The approach to the gas station in the course of this quest is one of the more tense navigational sequences in the Tian Wen questline, because the area is active in ways that the deeper buried city is not. There is human movement here, not just machine presence. There are people operating in this space who don't want to be observed, which means they are paying attention to the possibility of observation, which means the raider completing this quest has to navigate the environment with a level of awareness that goes beyond the standard machine avoidance pattern. This is intentional. Tian Wen knows this environment is active. She sent you in anyway, with the tools to accomplish both objectives if you're careful enough. The difficulty level is the assessment. If you can plant a bug without being detected in an actively monitored space, You are demonstrating a capability that will serve her purposes in subsequent assignments. If you can't, you're not the raider she needs for what comes next. The Berletta delivery is completed first. The cache near the gas station is identified. The weapon is deposited. The cache is secured. This first action, done correctly, establishes your presence in the area without triggering the kind of response that would compromise the second action. You are, in the cover story, doing your job, depositing a weapon in a cache that happens to be in this neighborhood. Now you need to extend your presence to plant the bug without escalating the situation. The bug itself is worth thinking about. What kind of information does she need from this location? Audio intelligence, the content of conversations happening in that space. Visual intelligence, the pattern of movement, the timing of activity, the identification of individuals operating there. Structural intelligence, what the space is being used for, how it has been modified, what that tells you about the operation's requirements and capabilities. The bug, if planted well, provides access to all of these over time, building a picture of the operation that static observation could never provide. Tian Wen will be the one processing that picture. That is the follow-on work that doesn't appear in the quest text, but is implied by its structure. She will listen, or have someone listen, or analyze the intelligence in whatever form it arrives. She will add it to what she already knows, and she will make a decision, or prepare the conditions for a decision, about what needs to happen next. This is who she is, at this level of her story. Not just a weapon crafter, not just a grieving daughter preserving pieces of a lost person, also a player in the Resistance's intelligence game, operating with the careful patience and the precision of deployment that characterizes everything she does, playing a long game toward an end that she has identified and is working toward with the deliberateness that makes her effective at everything she turns her attention to. Industrial espionage reveals the strategic dimension of her character, the dimension that connects the personal history and the professional excellence to something larger, something that lives at the intersection of her specific losses and the general cause of human survival. She is not just coping. She is not just maintaining. She is actively working, in her way, towards something, using all of the tools available to her, including the raiders who she disdains and depends on, and protects in her way, through the quality of what she sends them into the field with. The bug is planted, the weapon is delivered, the quest completes, but the operation doesn't complete, it continues, quietly in the intelligence now flowing from that gas station space, back to wherever Tian Wen is receiving it. She has extended her reach into a dangerous space by proxy, using a trusted raider as her hands in a situation where she cannot use her own. And she has done it, as she does everything, without explaining more than is strictly necessary, without asking for acknowledgement, without framing the operation in terms of the personal significance it likely carries for her. Because everything connects back. Every operation she runs, every piece of intelligence she gathers, every position she establishes connects back to the same origin point. Victory Ridge. The battle. The cost. The ongoing work of ensuring that the cost is not incurred again for the same reasons, that the failures of intelligence and preparation and logistics that contributed to what happened there are not repeated, that the machines and the humans who collaborate with them or operate in opposition to Speranza's interests are known and tracked and engaged before they can impose the same kind of irreversible damage they imposed once before. Tian Wen is fighting a war. It is not the war most people in Speranza recognize as the war. It is quieter. It operates through bugs and caches, and delivered weapons and briefed raiders, and the accumulated intelligence of years of watching and thinking and planning. It produces results that look like individual quests, individual missions, individual practical operations. But the shape beneath all of those individual things is a strategic posture, a long-term orientation toward a set of threats, based on a deep understanding of what those threats cost when they are not addressed in time. She understands the cost better than almost anyone. Chapter 10. Eyes on the Prize, What You See from Above. The title Eyes on the Prize carries a resonance that is different from the other quests in tone, but consistent in depth. It suggests focus, clarity, the maintained orientation toward an objective in the face of everything that tries to distract from it. It is the phrase of someone who knows what they want and has decided that the route to it matters less than the arrival. that obstacles are navigational problems rather than reasons to reconsider the destination. For Tian Wen, the phrase reads almost like an autobiography in 3 words. This quest sends you upward. The specific objective, the delivery of 3 wires to a rooftop terrace marked by blue tarps, is a literal ascent from the underground and ground-level geography of most of her other quests into elevated space. The buried city's rooftops are a different environment from its interior, more exposed, more visible, more subject to the ambient threat of arc aerial activity that is less of a concern in the sheltered layers below. Why does she need wires delivered to a rooftop terrace? The practical answer involves communication systems, or power relay, or the establishment of some kind of operational presence at altitude. These are all plausible in the technical economy of arc raiders, but the choice of rooftop, the specific location marked by the blue tarps, the elevated position, these carry an additional resonance. From a rooftop you can see. That is the most fundamental advantage of altitude. Sightlines, perspective, the ability to observe the landscape in a way that the compressed corridors of the underground do not permit. A rooftop position is a surveillance position, an intelligence position, the physical expression of the desire to understand the terrain rather than merely navigate it. Tian Wen is establishing something at elevation, something that requires wires, electrical infrastructure, communication capability, powered sensing equipment, any of these or combinations thereof. She is, in the pattern we've been establishing across this quest line, extending her reach, first into the buried city's depths for the marked for death cache, then across multiple locations for the objects of broken monument, then into the gas station operational zone for industrial espionage, now upward to altitude, to a position that adds a vertical dimension to the surveillance and operational architecture she is constructing. The blue tarps are a marker. In the visual language of improvised settlement and field operations, tarps in specific colors are used to mark positions for various purposes. Identification from specific observation points, weather protection that also functions as visual signal, landing or approach indicators for aerial or elevated operations. Blue, specifically, is visible at range under most lighting conditions, distinctive against the greys and browns that dominate the buried city's palette. Someone selected that color. Someone placed those tarps at this specific location on this specific rooftop. The prior establishment of the site suggests prior planning. This is not a location Tian Wen is establishing fresh through this quest. The terrace is already there, already marked, already selected as a position. The wires are what she needs to complete its activation, to bring it online as the operational position it was prepared to be. This is the language of infrastructure, the language of someone who thinks in terms of networks, of positions and connections, and the flows of information and capability that those connections enable. Tian Wen's operational mind works in these terms, as the accumulating pattern of her quests demonstrates. She is not solving individual problems, she is building a system. The cache locations, the surveillance equipment, the elevated position, the weapons in specific places, these are all nodes in a network, a distributed capability that extends her reach and her information beyond what any single asset or position could provide. Carrying 3 wires to a rooftop terrace is, in the grammar of this network, a crucial step. Wires are connection. They are the medium through which the system's nodes communicate, through which power flows from source to application. Without them, the position is isolated. With them, it joins the network. It becomes part of something larger than itself. The physical experience of the rooftop delivery is worth dwelling on. After the buried city's enclosed, compressed, light-deprived interior, the rooftop is a shock. The sky is wrong here, always has been since the Ark arrived, but from a rooftop you are exposed to it in a way that the underground layers protected you from. You are under an open sky that contains something that shouldn't be there, visible from above in a way that reminds you, with the full force of the visual, of what you're all living under. Raiders who work rooftop operations talk about this exposure differently than they talk about the underground. In the buried city below, the threat is immediate and physical. Machines in corridors, ambush from blocked sightlines, the compression that makes encounters sudden and close. On the rooftop, the threat is vertical and ambient. The wrong sky, the distant shapes of arc activity, the exposure that makes you feel visible in a way the underground doesn't. It is a different kind of fear, oriented upward rather than around, and it changes the way you move and the way you think about where you are. To navigate this, to carry wires to a marked position on a rooftop with the wrong sky overhead, requires a specific kind of resolution, not bravery in the conventional sense, which is the dramatic kind, the kind you perform in the moment of crisis, the quieter kind, the decision made before you're on the rooftop that you're going regardless, and the maintenance of that decision under conditions that might complicate it. Tian Wen sends raiders to this environment because she needs what's there, and she sends the raiders who have demonstrated through the preceding missions that they are capable of making and maintaining that kind of quiet decision. The quest line functions as a graduated assessment, each mission more demanding than the last, calibrated to reveal the specific capabilities she requires. By the time she's asking someone to deliver wires to a rooftop terrace in the arc-exposed buried city, she has already established that the person doing the delivering is someone she can trust with the exposed position. The blue tarps, once found, are a relief in the visual sense. They are the specific signal she told you to look for, the confirmation that you are where she intended you to be. Finding them is finding her intention in material form, her planning made visible in the field. She has been here, mentally, well before you arrived. She has thought through this position, calculated its value, prepared the ground, and now you are completing the last step of a plan she made before you knew this quest existed. This is a consistent quality of how her quests feel when you pay attention to them. The sense of arriving somewhere that was already planned, already prepared, where you are the final step of a process rather than the initiating impulse. Tian Wen does not react. She prepares. The preparation always precedes the deployment, which is why the deployments work, because by the time she sends someone out, the thinking has already been done. Your job is execution, and the execution is made possible by the quality of the preparation. The wires connect the terrace to the network. The network is a system she is building toward a purpose that is not entirely revealed in any single quest, but that accumulates in the whole. Marked for death, established presence in the industrial core, broken monument, recovered pieces of personal significance, industrial espionage extended reach into an active operational space. Eyes on the prize adds altitude, adds vertical surveillance capability, adds a node that covers the ground positions from above. The network, when complete, is a picture of the buried city from multiple perspectives and altitudes. A comprehensive intelligence architecture built by one person, executed by trusted raiders, designed to support operations she has already identified as necessary and future operations she is planning against eventualities she has already calculated. This is the scope of Tian Wen's actual work. The weapon craft is real and important, and the public face of what she does. But underneath it, alongside it, is this: the careful, patient, long-term construction of a capacity to understand and act in a world that remains fundamentally hostile, by a person who has decided that understanding is the precondition of survival, and that she will build that understanding brick by brick, wire by wire, camera by camera, one raider mission at a time. Eyes on the prize. Keep your focus on what matters. Don't let the obstacles convince you the destination isn't worth it. Don't let the exposure, the wrong sky, the compression of the underground, the grief of what you carry, don't let any of it make you put down the wires before you reach the terrace. She hasn't put anything down. She won't. The terrace is activated. The view from above is established. The network grows. Chapter 11. Snap and Salvage, the machine that remembers. Snap and Salvage is the most technically complex of Tian Wen's quests in terms of the required actions, and it is, in many ways, the most revealing of her relationship with the Ark's machines. The quest requires you to do something unusual: photograph rovers in the lower floor sandbox area, and then deliver a magnetron and a flow controller to complete the mission. Two distinct types of action: documentation and delivery, combined in a single quest that asks you to look at the machines before you bring the components needed to study them more closely. This is significant. Photography in the context of an Ark Raider's quest is not a common mechanic. You are not just shooting machines, not just running from them. not just avoiding them or outsmarting their patrol patterns. You are being asked to observe them, to see them specifically enough to record what you see, to take a picture that documents their presence in a particular space in a particular configuration. Why does Tian Wen need photos of rovers? The immediate practical answer is the kind of intelligence that informs equipment design. If you know what specific rover models are operating in a specific zone, you can optimize your defense against them, design weapons and tools specifically calibrated to their known vulnerabilities, anticipate their capabilities from known specifications, and modify your operational approach accordingly. This is the professional weapon crafter's use of machine intelligence, not just knowing that machines exist, but knowing which machines, doing what, with what capabilities, in what area. But there's more to it than that. Tian Wen's interest in the machines is not only professional, she has a personal history with what they are and what they do that gives her observation of them a quality beyond data collection. The Ark's rovers are the category of machine that operates at ground level, the machines most directly responsible for the fatalities that define her world. They are, in the most immediate sense, what killed her mother, not these specific units. Machines don't have continuous identity in the way that people do. But this category, this class of machine, these are the things. Looking at them through a camera lens is an act that has a quality different from looking at them through gun sights. Through sights, they are threats to be neutralized. Through a camera, they are subjects to be understood. Not neutralized in the moment, but studied for the long-term understanding that produces better neutralization in all moments. The camera requires stillness and proximity where the gun requires distance or decisive action. Photographing the rovers is a more intimate act of engagement than shooting them, and it carries the ambivalence that intimacy with the thing that destroyed something important to you always carries. She is studying her enemy, not in the abstract, not through existing records or second-hand accounts, but through fresh documentation of current units in current configurations, in current deployment patterns. She is updating her understanding, and she is doing it in the sandbox area, a designation that implies a relatively controlled testing or operational environment, a space where machine activity follows patterns that are more observable than the chaotic zones of active engagement. The sandbox is the place to observe without immediately dying. The magnetron and the flow controller are the second part of the quest's requirement. Both of these are components with specific technical functions that intersect with the kinds of equipment she maintains and builds. A magnetron is a vacuum tube that generates microwave radiation, the heart of various sensing, communication, and processing systems, both Arc-related and human-built. A flow controller manages the movement of fluid or gas through a system, a fundamental component in everything from cooling systems to propellant management. These components, delivered along with photographic documentation of rover configurations, suggest that Tian Wen is building or modifying a system that uses the combined intelligence, the visual documentation of what the machines are doing, and the physical components to build something that responds to what they're doing. She is, in short, working on countermeasures, not reactive countermeasures, defenses that respond to attacks as they happen, but proactive ones, systems designed from the understanding of the machine's specific current configurations to address those configurations before they present as immediate threats. This is the most sophisticated expression of her craft in the entire questline. She has moved from personal archaeology, broken monument, through operational expansion, industrial espionage, eyes on the prize, to active technological development in response to a documented machine threat. The progression is the progression of someone who has been doing this work for a long time and is always moving toward the next level of capability, never satisfied with the defensive posture she has, always working toward a better positioned one. The sandbox area presents its own navigational challenges. Rovers in this zone are present and active, which means photographing them requires approaching closely enough to get usable documentation without triggering the engagement response that would transform the observation mission into a survival mission. This is a different skill set from general buried city navigation. It requires patience, an understanding of the machine's sensor ranges and detection thresholds, and the ability to use the environment to approach from angles that minimize detection probability. Raiders who do this well tend to describe it as a strange experience, watching the machines without engaging them, seeing them as objects of study rather than threats. The cognitive shift required is significant. In normal operation, machine awareness is threat awareness. You track machines in order to avoid or eliminate them. In this mission, machine awareness is observational. You track them in order to see them clearly, to document them, to understand them. The same attention deployed to a different purpose, and the difference in purpose changes the experience considerably. There is something almost philosophical about being asked, by Tian Wen of all people, to stop and look at the machines. To not run from them, not shoot them, but observe them. She who has every reason to want them eliminated rather than studied, who carries the deepest and most personal reason to regard them as pure threat, she is the one who insists on understanding them before acting on that understanding. This is the discipline that distinguishes her approach from the reactive emotional approach that she criticizes in Careless Raiders. You have to know what you're dealing with before you can deal with it correctly. She has always known this. She has always operated this way. And snap and salvage is the most direct expression of that operating principle in the quest line. The quest where she literally asks you to stop and look at the thing that has cost her so much, because looking is the beginning of knowing, and knowing is the beginning of addressing. And addressing is the only appropriate response to a world that has the capacity to take away what matters most. The magnetron and flow controller, once delivered, disappear into the workshop, into the system she is building, the capability she is developing, the specific technical response to the specific threat profile she has just had you document. She will use them. The weapons they help build or enhance will go out with raiders and will perform with the precision she holds herself to in the specific conditions she now better understands. Everything connects. Everything she does, the personal recovery of pieces of her mother's presence, the intelligence architecture in the buried city, the elevated surveillance position, and now the technical documentation and component collection for countermeasure development. Everything feeds back into the work, and the work feeds back into the purpose, and the purpose feeds back, ultimately, to the fact that lives depend on what she builds, and she will not let them die for want of knowledge that was available if someone was paying enough attention. She is always paying enough attention. That is the constant in all of it. Snap and salvage is also, in its combination of photography and material collection, a kind of methodological statement. Document first. Understand what you're working with. Then acquire the materials. Then build the response. This is the scientific method applied to survival. The structured approach to knowledge that Tian Wen applies to everything, from the diagnosis of a broken weapon to the design of a countermeasure system for a machine threat she has studied through the lens of a raider's camera. She is both the scientist and the engineer in her own operation. She generates the questions and the methodology and the systems for answering the questions and then builds from the answers. She does all of this from a workbench in a corner of Speranza with a small number of trusted raiders as her hands in the field, with limited resources and enormous expertise, and a clarity of purpose that comes from having spent years understanding, in the most personal possible terms, exactly what is at stake. The rovers in the sandbox will continue their patterns. They don't know they've been documented. They don't know that the documentation has been carried back to a workshop where someone is building, piece by piece, the means to address them more effectively than they have been addressed before. The indifference runs both ways. The machines don't know about Tian Wen, just as they didn't know about Ava. But Tian Wen knows about them. And that asymmetry, that knowledge she has and they lack, is the only leverage she has ever had. And she has used it with everything she's got. Chapter 12. Tian Wen's Code. Why she does what she does. We have now walked through all 5 of Tian Wen's quests, and we have seen the shape that they make when viewed together, the pattern beneath the individual missions, the architecture of a life and a purpose and a grief, all expressing themselves through the specific practical language of a weapon crafter in a settlement at the edge of a hostile world. Now it's time to synthesize, to take everything we've looked at and put it into a single coherent picture. The code by which Tian Wen operates, the principles that organize her behavior, the values that make her the specific person she is, rather than some other configuration of the same materials. The first and most fundamental principle is this: work is love, expressed correctly. Everything that functions as care in Tian Wen's life is expressed through doing, through the application of skill and attention and effort to something that will protect or enable the person it is done for. She doesn't say she cares, she builds something that works. She doesn't perform concern, she tightens the tolerances. The care is real, the medium of its expression is metal and precision, and the extra time she spent on the thing you can't see, but that she knows matters. Understanding this principle is the precondition for understanding everything else about her. The second principle: excellence is not optional when lives depend on it. This is not a standard she claims for herself as a form of vanity or competitiveness. It is a standard she holds because she has seen, in the most intimate and irreversible terms, what the alternative looks like. When the preparation is insufficient, when the equipment is not what it should be, when the planning hasn't gone far enough, or the intelligence isn't complete enough, people don't come back. She has experienced the not coming back as the central fact of her life. The excellence is her response to that fact, sustained over years into something that has become the structure of her professional identity. The third principle: know before you act. Observe. Document. Understand the specific nature of what you're dealing with before deploying a response. This is not caution in the sense of hesitation. She is not slow to act when action is warranted. It is caution in the sense of insisting on the quality of the information that drives action, on the adequacy of the preparation, on the completeness of the picture before committing to the move. Every quest in her line is an expression of this principle. She is always gathering information, always improving her understanding, always building a more complete picture of the threats and the terrain. The fourth principle: independence, not isolation. She operates at the edge of the community, maintains significant distance, guards her most personal spaces carefully. But she is not trying to exist without the community. She is trying to exist within it at a distance that she controls, in a relationship that she manages, in a configuration that allows her to give and receive what needs to be exchanged without the kind of exposure that would leave her vulnerable to the specific form of loss she cannot afford to experience again. The independence is structural, not philosophical. She doesn't believe in solo existence. She just can't afford the kind of togetherness that has previously been fatal. The fifth principle: the past is not gone, it is retrievable. The quests for the compass, the videotape, the field rations, these are expressions of a belief that the material of the past persists and can be recovered, that what was does not simply vanish, but exists in the form of objects and locations and traces that can be found if you know where to look. This belief is what distinguishes her from the kind of grief that simply accepts loss as complete. She doesn't accept it as complete. She goes looking. She finds pieces. She brings them back and makes a place for them, because the past is not a closed country. It is terrain you can navigate if you have the skills and the willingness. The sixth principle: trust is earned through demonstrated competence, not through expressed loyalty, not through personal charm, not through persistence or goodwill, through the repeated demonstration of the specific capabilities that make you useful in the specific tasks she has. The raiders she trusts most are the ones who have completed her hardest missions correctly, who have shown through execution rather than assertion that they can be relied on. This is not a warm way of building trust. It is a reliable one. The seventh principle: the machines are a problem to be solved, not a fate to be accepted. She has never accepted the ark as the final condition of the world, not because she is optimistic. Optimism is not one of her qualities, but because she has chosen, deliberately and with full awareness of what she's choosing, to spend her life building the tools and the intelligence and the capability to address the machines, rather than simply surviving in their shadow. The distinction between surviving under a threat and working toward its end may seem subtle, but for Tian Wen, it is everything. It is the difference between her mother's death being the last word and it being the beginning of a response. These 7 principles together form the code. They explain why she is the way she is, why the bluntness, why the expertise, why the particular quest she gives, why the specific locations, why the combination of personal archaeology and operational intelligence and technical development that her quest line represents. They are not abstract values that she has articulated and adopted. They are the product of lived experience, of choices made in the aftermath of loss, of a self constructed with the same deliberateness and care she brings to everything she builds. She is, in the final analysis, her own best work. Not her weapons, not her intelligence network, not the surveillance architecture she has built in the buried city. Herself. The person she made when the person who was supposed to make her stopped being available. The self that was built in the workshop, piece by piece, standard by standard, year by year, from the materials of grief and talent and will, and the stubborn refusal to let the cost of one battle determine the outcome of all subsequent battles. This is why she is worth this much attention. Not because she is heroic in the conventional sense. She wouldn't accept the word. Not because her story is easy or warm or satisfying in the ways that stories about loss sometimes manage to be, but because she represents something real about what it takes to persist in a world that has demonstrated its capacity to take away what matters most. She represents the specific kind of person who doesn't break, who builds instead, who turns the wound into the craft and the craft into the work, and the work into a reason to get up the next morning and do it again. In the economy of stories about survival, Tian Wen's story is one of the most honest ones available. It doesn't pretend that healing means returning to something that was. It shows what you look like when you've learned to live in the aftermath. Not healed, not destroyed, but functioning, with purpose, in the way that a well-built mechanism functions. Not because it's simple or frictionless, but because every part of it was designed to work with every other part, and the design was done by someone who cared. She cared. She built herself as carefully as she builds anything. And the result is a person who is harder to reach than most, but more worth reaching than most, and who expresses her care for the world and the people in it in the only language she entirely trusts, the language of doing the work as well as it can possibly be done, for the people who need it, in the world that requires it, because the alternative is not acceptable to someone who understands what good enough costs. Chapter 13. The Legacy, what Tian Wen leaves behind. We have arrived at the last chapter of this video, and it feels appropriate to acknowledge that arrival, not as a formal conclusion, but as a moment of stillness after the journey. We have covered enormous ground, from the shape of the world to the texture of a single workbench, from the broad strokes of the arc to the specific frequency of a grief that was never fully named, from the mechanics of weaponcraft to the architecture of a person's relationship with their own loss. We have been trying, throughout, to understand one person as completely as the available evidence allows, and now we have most of what we're going to get. What does Tian Wen leave behind? Not in the mortal sense. She is alive, she is present, she is working, and this video is not her eulogy, but in the sense of what she will have contributed by the time her story in this world reaches whatever conclusion it reaches. What is the legacy she is in the process of building? The weapons are the most obvious answer. The instruments she has created that exist in raiders' hands, that have performed in situations where performance was everything, that have sent rounds accurately to targets that needed to be hit. Every one of those weapons is a legacy, a piece of her knowledge and care made material, deployed in the world, doing work that persists beyond the moment of its making. Some of them have saved lives. That is not a small thing to leave behind. But the weapons are the visible legacy. The less visible one is the capability she has built, the intelligence architecture in the buried city, the surveillance network, the positions established and equipped across the vertical range of that environment. This is the infrastructure of future operations, the capability that someone will use after her work is complete to conduct engagements and gather intelligence and make decisions that will protect people in Speranza and beyond. She is building for the future, not just for the present, and the future legacy of that building is not yet complete. Then there is the legacy that she would find the most uncomfortable to acknowledge, the understanding that she has contributed to the raiders who have worked with her, the knowledge about quality and preparation, and the relationship between skill and outcome that has filtered through the interactions and the quests and the standards she has modeled. She doesn't lecture, she doesn't mentor in any formal sense, but she has demonstrated, with the clarity of repeated example, what it looks like to take work seriously, to hold a standard regardless of the cost in time or effort, to care about outcome in the way that the outcome deserves, Raiders who have worked with her carry that demonstration with them, and it changes how they work. This is legacy of a kind she would particularly deny, not because it isn't real, but because it requires her to be seen as influential, as significant to others, in a way that contradicts the carefully maintained self-presentation of someone who doesn't need to matter to anyone. She matters. She would be furious about this if you told her, and then she would turn back to the work, and the fury would be indistinguishable from what she was doing before, because her fury and her focus are made from the same material and expressed through the same channel. The private legacy is the one that lives in the workshop, in the pieces she has recovered and arranged in the space that is most completely hers, the compass, the videotape, the field rations, whatever else she has recovered that we don't see directly, that exists in the inventory of her private meaning. This is the legacy she keeps for herself, not for Speranza, not for raiders, not for the resistance, for herself and for the person the relics commemorate, a memorial that functions in the way that the official memorial cannot. Personal, specific, tended by hands that remember specifically, preserved because the specific matters more than the general when what you're trying to hold is not a category, but an individual. The broken monument is being repaired, piece by piece, quest by quest, raider by raider, trusted with a specific retrieval that they may not fully understand, but that they execute correctly. It will not be the same monument it was before it broke. It will be something different, assembled from recovered pieces by a person who is also different from who she was before it broke. But it will hold. She will make it hold. She does not let things go that she has decided to keep. What does she want the world to know about her, if she wanted the world to know anything? Probably nothing. She is not engaged in a campaign of self-expression. She is not trying to be understood by the general population of Speranza or the broader world that has forgotten she exists. She wants her work to speak for itself, which is the position of every craftsperson who has achieved mastery. The work is the statement, the work says everything, the work is the thing worth knowing. But we have looked behind the work. We have followed the thread from the workbench to Victory Ridge, to Major Iver, to the buried city and back. And what we have found is exactly what the quests implied and the silences suggested. A person of profound care, expressed in the only idioms she trusts, for a world that she has decided is worth fighting for, even though it has given her every reason to make the opposite decision. She fights for it by building better weapons. She fights for it by establishing intelligence positions in dangerous places. She fights for it by recovering the pieces of people she lost and keeping them in a space she controls. She fights for it by sending raiders to hard places with the best possible equipment and the exact intelligence they need and the implicit expectation that they will come back alive, because coming back alive is the minimum acceptable outcome, and anything less represents a failure of the system she has dedicated herself to making fail-proof. Nothing is fail-proof. She knows this. Victory Ridge proved it with the most personal available evidence. But the answer to the knowledge that nothing is fail-proof is not to stop trying to build things that work. The answer is to try harder, know more, prepare better, hold standards higher, recover faster, keep going regardless, keep working, keep building, keep the monument from staying broken. This is Tian Wen. This is the complete law, as complete as the game makes available, as complete as this reading can render it. A woman in a corner of a last settlement, working on things that matter, carrying more than she says, building more than is visible, fighting a war that is larger and longer and more personal than any single raider engagement, and doing it all in the language of craft, because craft is what she trusts, craft is what lasts, and craft is how she says every important thing she will never say out loud. Thank you for watching this video. We started with a single sentence about what the Ark did to the world, and we ended up here, with the specific gravity of a single person's specific story, which turns out to be where all the real meaning was all along. Not in the machines, not in the war, in the people the war happened to, and what they built in its aftermath, and what that building says about the capacity of human beings to keep going in conditions that should not allow for going. Tian Wen keeps going. She always has. She will continue to. If this video gave you something, a new understanding of a character you'd noticed, but not fully examined, a new way of thinking about the lore of this world, a new appreciation for the depth that this game hides in the gaps between quest objectives and character dialogue, then it did exactly what I made it to do. The Ark is still up there, the buried city is still down there, and in Speranza, in a corner workshop that smells of metal and oil and the particular chemical trace of concentrated expertise, a woman is at a workbench, doing the work. As she always has, as she will tomorrow, as she will until the work is done or the world doesn't need it anymore, whichever comes first. Eyes on the prize, all the way to the end. That's it for this video. If you found value in this lore deep dive, please hit that like button. It helps the algorithm understand that this kind of detailed, careful content is worth surfacing to people who would appreciate it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. I put everything into these videos, and your support is what allows me to keep making them. Stay curious, keep digging into the stories that don't announce themselves, and I will see you in the next one. Chapter 14, The Weapons She Never Named. There is a tradition among certain craftspeople of naming their finest work. Swords have been named throughout human history, ships, aircraft. The objects that carried people through danger sometimes received names as a form of acknowledgement. An elevation from the category of tool to the category of companion, a recognition that the relationship between a person and the instrument they depend on in life or death conditions has a quality that exceeds the transactional. Naming is the human gesture of attachment, the refusal to treat something important as merely a means to an end. Tian Wen does not name her weapons. This is a deliberate choice, and like everything deliberate about her, it is worth understanding. She builds things that people will carry into situations where those things are the difference between living and not living. She builds them with a care that exceeds professional obligation, a care that expresses itself in every tolerance and every finish and every decision made about component selection. She builds them better than she has to, consistently, every time, and she does not give them names. Why? Because naming creates attachment. Naming is the first step in a sequence that ends in caring about the fate of the thing named, and caring about the fate of something that is going to be carried into danger is an additional weight she does not need to carry. She cares enough about the raiders who carry her weapons without adding the additional layer of caring about the weapons themselves as individuated things. The weapons are not the point. The function is the point. The function serves the person. The person is what matters. The weapon should be excellent, and then it should go do its work without becoming an object of sentiment. This is consistent with everything we know about her relationship to objects. The tools in her workshop are not named either. She knows them individually, yes, in the way that you know the specific characteristics of each tool that makes it distinctly itself, but she does not give them identities beyond their function. Even the objects from Broken Monument, the compass, the videotape, the field rations, she would not describe these as named things. They are not characters in her emotional vocabulary. They are specific material instances of connection with a person who is no longer present. They are held, not named. The distinction matters because it tells us something about how she relates to meaning. She does not externalize meaning by elevating objects into symbolic status. She holds meaning internally, in the private geography of what things are to her, without advertising that geography through the social act of naming. The weapons she builds remain weapons. What she put into them remains hers. The raider who carries the weapon experiences the function, but not the care, which is exactly how she prefers it. This is the fundamental emotional architecture of her life, as we have come to understand it. She gives real things to people, weapons that work better than they needed to, intelligence that is more thorough than was asked for, missions that develop capabilities that protect people she would deny caring about. And she gives these things without receipts, without acknowledgement, without the social exchange that would make the giving visible as an act of care. She is, at the deepest level, a person who has found the way to love people while maintaining the structure that keeps her from being destroyed when she loses them. The weapons she builds outlive the missions they're carried on. They persist in Speranza's armory, passed from raider to raider, serviced and maintained as they age, carrying the evidence of her craft in the wear patterns and the performance characteristics that distinguish her work from anything else in the settlement. They are anonymous archives of her attention, objects whose existence proves that she was here and that she cared, without ever making that proof available to anyone who doesn't know how to read it. Some raiders, over time, learn to read it. They develop the discriminating eye that comes from handling many weapons, and they recognize when a weapon has been touched by someone operating at her level. They can feel it in the way the action cycles, in the balance of the piece in the hand, in the specific quality of the trigger break. They don't always know what they're recognizing, or don't always name it, but they feel the difference. And in feeling the difference, they are in contact with something she put there, a trace of her care that persists in the mechanism long after she has moved on to the next thing. This is as close as she gets to leaving a signature. Not her name, not a mark, not anything as declarative as that. Just the presence of a standard held, visible to whoever has the acuity to perceive it. The quality of the work is the signature. The excellence is the declaration. And it says, to anyone who can read it, someone was here who took this seriously, who held the work to a standard it didn't have to be held to, who chose the harder approach because the harder approach was correct. In the catalogue of the unnamed things she has built, there are weapons that have saved specific lives in specific moments. These events are not recorded anywhere. The raider who made the shot didn't know the margin was provided by her work. The person who didn't die because the weapon didn't jam in the moment it couldn't afford to jam doesn't know her name was in the clearance that prevented the jam. The absence of this acknowledgement is not something she regrets. It is something she has designed for. The work and the outcome are the point. The credit is not a currency she trades in. But there are moments, she would not describe them this way, but they exist, where a raider comes back from a mission that should not have been survivable, and she looks at the weapon they bring back. And the way the weapon looks tells her a story about what it went through and how it performed. And in that reading of the weapon, she understands something about the margin between outcome and disaster. And what she understands contains something that is not exactly pride, but lives in the same neighborhood. The work held. The person came back. The function was sufficient to the demand placed on it. This is the closest thing to satisfaction she allows herself. The weapons she never named carry the name she never gave them. It is in the metal. It is in the function. It is in the margin. They are her testimony, anonymous and persistent, and doing their work in the world without asking to be recognized for it. Which is exactly how she lives. Which is exactly who she is. The weapons she has built for raiders who subsequently died are harder to think about, and she doesn't think about them if she can avoid it. The failure is not always in the weapon. Often, it isn't. Raiders die for many reasons in the field, and the quality of their equipment is one factor among many that interact in complex ways. She knows this. She has done the analysis, many times, with the detachment of someone who cannot afford not to do it. She knows when the weapon wasn't the limiting factor. But there are specific instances she carries where the analysis produces a different result, where something could have been better, where a design decision made a marginal difference in the wrong direction, where the standard she held wasn't quite adequate to the demand that was placed on it. These instances live in her as a specific weight, a professional record of moments where the work was not enough. She revisits them. She updates her methods based on them. She holds the knowledge of them as a permanent motivation to not create the conditions for new ones. This is not the behavior of someone who doesn't care about the people who carry her work. This is the behavior of someone who cares so much that every failure is a failure of the deepest possible kind, not a professional setback, not a quality control issue, but a specific instance of the mechanism breaking down between her care and its intended effect. These are the instances she loses sleep over, if she loses sleep over anything. These are what drives the extra hour on the thing that doesn't need the extra hour, but gets it anyway. The weapons she never named are her children, in the oblique and non-sentimental way that a person like Tian Wen can have children. She puts something of herself into each one. She sends them out into a dangerous world and cannot follow them. She receives word, sometimes, of how they performed. She does not grieve the ones that don't return to her bench. She updates her understanding based on what their performance tells her, and she applies that understanding to the next one, and the work continues. It continues because the work continuing is the only answer available, not a satisfying one, not one that resolves the weight of the losses, the professional and personal and existential ones, but the one that is available, the one she has chosen, the one that produces the closest thing to something worth having in a world that has taken everything she has decided she valued and made her negotiate a new definition of what worth having means. The weapons she never named are her best argument, better than anything she would say aloud, better than the official record, better than the community's memory of her mother, which is real but insufficient. The weapons are the specific, material, functional argument that she made a difference, that she was here, that what she did in her corner of this broken world was not negligible, that it was, in the specific moments when it mattered most, the thing that changed the outcome. She cannot know how many such moments there have been. She can know that the number is not zero, and in the economy of what she permits herself to value, that is enough. It has to be enough. She has decided it is enough. And in that decision, made over years and maintained through everything, is the quiet heroism that she would furiously deny if you named it. So we won't name it, we'll just note that it exists, the way the best things in her life exist, present, unmistakable, doing its work, unnamed. The weapons continue to go out, the weapons continue to be used, the weapons continue to be the margin. And in the margins, invisible and precise and absolutely real, Tian Wen continues to be present in the world in the only way she has decided she can safely be present. Through the work, through the function, through the things she built in the silence of her workshop that carried her care out into the field and brought the people home who came home. Chapter 15. Speranza After Dark. The community she keeps. There is a version of Speranza that Tian Wen does not participate in. And understanding what that version looks like helps clarify the shape of her participation in the version she does engage with. Speranza After Dark. When the operational tempo drops, when the raiders who went out that day have either returned or stopped being expected, when the community processes the day and exists together in the particular way that people in difficult circumstances exist together in the evenings. This version of the settlement is as important to understanding the community as any daytime account of its functions. After dark in Speranza is when the social fabric becomes most visible, because it is when the practical tasks that structure the day give way to the more discretionary activities of community life.